My parents handed my younger sister a massive check to fund her luxury lifestyle while I worked two exhausting jobs just to survive. You do not have her business potential, they told me right to my face. 4 years later, at my university graduation, the dean stepped up to the microphone and called my name first, announcing me as the founder of a Silicon Valley tech empire. My mother grabbed my father's arm, her face completely pale, and whispered that they had made a terrible mistake. My name is Jocelyn. I am 33 years old, and today I am the Chief Executive Officer of a highly successful financial technology firm. But getting here required surviving the most toxic environment imaginable, my own family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire from nothing, because the people who should have supported you threw you to the wolves. 4 years ago, I was 29 years old and working as a low-level data entry clerk. It was Thanksgiving night, and the dining room of my parents' sprawling suburban home was suffocatingly warm. The long mahogany table was set with fine china crystal wine glasses and a massive roasted turkey that my mother Diane had ordered from an expensive catering service so she could pretend she cooked it. My father Harrison sat at the head of the table in his tailored suit holding court, as if he were the king of a small nation. My younger sister Savannah, who was 25 at the time, sat across from me next to her wealthy and arrogant fiancé Preston. They were drinking premium red wine and laughing about their latest country club drama. I sat quietly, my hands gripping a thick envelope in my lap. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I had been waiting for the right moment all evening. Inside that envelope was my official acceptance letter to a prestigious Master of Data Analytics program. It was my ticket out of the data entry cubicle. It was my chance to actually build a career. But I needed a co-signer for my federal student loan. My credit score had taken a massive hit in my early 20s, and I could not secure the financing alone. I took a deep breath, smoothing out the paper, and placed the university letter gently on the table next to my father's plate. Dad, I started keeping my voice as calm and respectful as possible. I received my acceptance letter today. The program starts in the spring. It is an incredible opportunity, and the starting salary for graduates is easily 6 figures. I just need a co-signer for the student loan paperwork. I will make every single payment myself, I promise. Harrison did not even bother to pick up the paper. He glanced down at the university logo, let out a heavy sigh of annoyance, and casually used the back of his hand to sweep the letter off the table. The crisp parchment fluttered to the hardwood floor, landing next to his polished leather shoes. Jocelyn, I am completely tied up with investment cash flow right now, he said, returning his attention to slicing the turkey. You know how the real estate market is. I cannot tie my name to a massive student loan liability. It ruins my debt-to-income ratio. Besides, going back to school at your age is a massive financial risk. You already have a stable job doing data entry. Why rock the boat? I stared at the piece of paper on the floor. The physical manifestation of years of hard work, late-night studying, and desperate hope just tossed aside like garbage. Dad, it is not a risk, I pleaded, my voice trembling slightly. It is an investment. I have mapped out the entire repayment plan. I just need your signature. I am not asking for a single dollar from your bank account. My mother slammed her wine glass down onto the table. The sharp clinking sound made everyone freeze. Jocelyn, you are being incredibly selfish right now, Diane snapped, glaring at me with absolute disdain. It is Thanksgiving. We are supposed to be celebrating our blessings as a family, and here you are cornering your father about money and loans. You only ever think about yourself. Do you have any idea how much pressure your father is under to maintain our lifestyle? You should be grateful we even invited you to dinner instead of causing this ridiculous drama. The hypocrisy of her words felt like a physical slap across the face. Selfish. I was the one working 50-hour weeks just to afford rent in a tiny studio apartment while Savannah lived rent-free in their pool house and spent her days shopping online. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste blood, trying desperately to keep my emotions in check. Right after calling me selfish, Diane reached into her designer handbag, resting on the empty chair beside her. She pulled out a sleek leather checkbook and a gold pen. The atmosphere at the table shifted instantly. Savannah sat up perfectly straight, her eyes lighting up with greedy anticipation. Preston smirked, leaning back in his chair and wrapping an arm around Savannah's shoulders. Diane clicked the pen and began writing with grand, sweeping motions. "We actually have some wonderful news to share tonight," my mother announced, her tone suddenly transforming into a sickeningly sweet melody. "Savannah has presented us with a brilliant business plan. She is launching her own premium vegan cosmetics brand. Your father and I believe in her vision completely." Diane ripped the check from the book and slid it across the table to Savannah. I caught a glimpse of the numbers written in bold black ink. $150,000. My breath caught in my throat. I felt physically ill. My parents had just handed my sister $150,000 in pure cash. No strings attached, right after telling me they could not simply sign their name on a piece of paper to help me secure a student loan. Savannah squealed with delight, snatching the check and waving it in the air. "Oh my God, Mom! Dad, thank you so much!" she shrieked. Preston kissed her cheek, adding a smug comment about how Savannah was born to be an entrepreneur. I looked at my mother completely dumbfounded. "You just gave her $150,000. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You said cash flow was tied up. You said taking financial risks was a bad idea." Diane looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Savannah needs seed money for her brand, Jocelyn. She has actual CEO potential. She has a massive social media following, and Preston has the network to help her succeed. You do not have that kind of potential. Let us be brutally honest here. You sit in a cubicle typing numbers into a spreadsheet. Spending money on a master degree for you is just throwing cash out the window. Savannah is an investment with a guaranteed return. You are a liability." I sat there paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of her words. It was not just the refusal of the loan. It was the deliberate, calculated way they chose to humiliate me. They wanted me to know exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. I was the bottom feeder. I was the failure. Savannah laughed, a sharp and mocking sound that grated against my ears. "Do not be jealous just because you lack ambition, Jocelyn," she sneered. She reached across the table to grab the gravy boat. As she pulled her arm back, her elbow intentionally slammed into her full glass of red wine. The dark crimson liquid vaulted across the table in a dramatic arc. It bypassed the plates and splashed directly onto the side table where my battered 5-year-old laptop was sitting. I had brought it with me to show my father my detailed repayment spreadsheets. The wine seeped straight into the keyboard, immediately short-circuiting the ancient machine. The screen flickered violently, hissed, and went completely black. "Oops," Savannah said, not sounding sorry in the slightest. She grabbed a cloth napkin and casually dabbed at the edge of the table, not even bothering to wipe the liquid off my computer. "Well, excuse my clumsiness. But hey, it is not a big deal. You do not really need a laptop to be a lowly data entry clerk anyway, right?" Preston chuckled softly at her cruel joke, taking a slow sip of his own wine. That was the moment the final thread tying me to my family snapped completely. Her malicious taunt about my job unlocked a vault of suppressed memories. My mind flashed back to when I was 20 years old. Harrison had made a catastrophic error in the stock market, racking up massive credit card debt under my name because I had foolishly trusted him with my social security number to help build my credit. I spent the first half of my 20s working 2 minimum wage jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, and eating cheap noodles just to pay off the debt he accrued. I sacrificed my own college experience to save this family from financial ruin and public embarrassment. I bailed them out, and this was my reward: being called a liability, having my future dismissed, watching them hand a fortune to the sister who had never worked a day in her life. I looked at the ruined laptop. I looked at Savannah's smug, punchable face. I looked at Harrison and Diane, who were actively ignoring my ruined computer to focus on pouring more wine for Preston. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw a tantrum. The fiery anger inside me suddenly condensed into a block of pure, freezing ice. I felt absolutely nothing but total calculating clarity. I realized right then that they would never change, and I would never win their approval. More importantly, I realized I no longer wanted it. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the expensive hardwood floor. The sound made them all pause and look at me. I walked over to the side table. I did not try to dry the laptop. I simply reached around to the side of the ruined machine and unplugged a small encrypted USB backup drive. That tiny piece of metal held my entire life work, my coding projects, my data models, and the proprietary risk analysis algorithms I had been building in secret for 2 years. I slipped the drive into my coat pocket. "Where do you think you are going?" Harrison demanded, his voice thick with authoritarian annoyance. "Sit down and finish your dinner. Stop throwing a pity party just because your sister is succeeding." I did not answer him. I turned my back on the dining room, walked up the grand staircase to the guest room where my belongings were stored, and packed my single suitcase in complete silence. I zipped it up, grabbed my coat, and walked straight out the front door into the freezing November night. I did not say goodbye. I did not slam the door. I just left. As I walked down the long, perfectly manicured driveway of their suburban estate, I pulled out my phone and checked my banking app. My total available balance was exactly $300. It was barely enough to cover groceries for the month, let alone tuition or rent. The cold wind bit into my face, but I did not shiver. I looked back at the glowing windows of the dining room one last time. I made a silent, unbreakable vow to myself in the dark. I would never return to this house until I held the deed to it. I would build my empire, and I would let them watch from the bottom. 2 years passed in a relentless cycle of caffeine spreadsheets and pure survival. Every morning my alarm went off at exactly 4 o'clock. I spent 2 hours coding the foundation of my financial risk analysis software before commuting to my day job as a junior data analyst at a mid-tier firm. I worked from 8 in the morning until 5 in the evening, staring at numbers until my vision blurred. But my day did not end there. By 6, I traded my office blazer for a stiff white button-down shirt and a black apron. I waited tables at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a playground for the local elite. It was a grueling, punishing existence. My feet were perpetually blistered, my back constantly ached, and my bank account drained to zero every single month to pay for my master's degree tuition. But I kept my head down. I maintained a perfect 4.0 grade point average, and my proprietary algorithm was slowly coming to life. I did not take a single day off. I did not speak to my family once. That unbroken silence shattered on a busy Friday night in early November. The country club dining room was fully booked, buzzing with the low hum of wealthy patrons clinking crystal glasses. I was carrying a heavy silver tray loaded with oysters and champagne when I heard a shrill, obnoxious laugh that made my blood run instantly cold. I turned my head toward the grand entrance. Savannah was strutting into the main dining hall, draped in a flashy designer gown that cost more than my entire semester tuition. A massive diamond engagement ring blinded anyone who dared to look in her direction. Beside her was Preston, looking incredibly arrogant in a bespoke tailored suit. They were escorting an older, wealthy-looking man to a prime window table, acting as if they owned the entire establishment. I immediately spun around, retreating to the safety of the service station. I prayed they would not notice me. I had survived 24 months without their toxic presence, and I did not want to break my hard-earned peace. But predators always spot their prey. Savannah had the eyes of a hawk when it came to finding an opportunity to elevate herself by stepping on someone else. Within minutes, my floor manager tapped my shoulder. He looked nervous as he handed me a ticket. He told me the VIP guests at table 7 had specifically requested me as their server. They claimed we were old friends who needed catching up. I knew exactly what she was doing. I took a deep, steadying breath, picked up my order notepad, and walked over to their table. My face was a mask of pure, unreadable ice. "Good evening," I said, keeping my tone strictly professional and void of any familiarity. "Welcome to Oak Ridge. May I start you off with some beverages?" Savannah leaned back in her plush leather chair, her eyes scanning my uniform with absolute disgust and raw delight. "Oh my God," she gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. She spoke loudly, ensuring the adjacent tables could hear every single word. Jocelyn, is that really you? I had absolutely no idea you were working as a servant now. I guess this is what happens when you turn your back on your family to chase some useless degree you cannot even afford. Preston chuckled, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He turned to the older gentleman sitting across from them. This is my fiancé's older sister, Mr. Caldwell. She has always struggled to find her place in the real world. We try to be supportive, but some people just lack the basic ambition to make it in business. You know how it is. It is truly a shame to see family fall so far behind. Mr. Caldwell looked at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. I kept my posture completely rigid. I did not flinch. I did not defend myself. I stood perfectly still, my pen hovering over my notepad, staring blankly at Savannah while I waited for her order. Savannah reveled in the power dynamic. She picked up the menu and began barking orders with the sole intention of humiliating me. I will have the Wagyu ribeye, but I need it seared exactly medium rare on the outside and blue rare on the inside. If it is overcooked by a single second, I will send it back and have you pay for it. And the truffle mashed potatoes cannot have any dairy, but they must be whipped with clarified butter. Can you manage to write all of that down? Or is typing numbers into a computer the only skill you actually possess? Preston chimed in, leaning his elbows heavily on the pristine tablecloth. Bring me the oldest scotch you have. And make sure the glass is perfectly clean. I do not want to see any greasy fingerprints from the kitchen staff ruining my drink. They were performing for their investor. They were using my position as a waitress to elevate their own perceived status, painting themselves as the highly successful, wealthy entrepreneurs while treating their own flesh and blood like a lowly peasant. Savannah made sure to loudly mention her vegan cosmetics brand, boasting to Mr. Caldwell about how her sales were supposedly skyrocketing into the millions and how she was preparing to expand her empire globally. She painted a picture of absolute, unshakable success. I wrote down their ridiculous demands in total silence. Right away, I replied, my voice completely flat. I will put those orders in for the kitchen. As I turned to leave, Savannah deliberately pushed her elbow outward with a sharp, calculated motion, knocking her heavy crystal water goblet straight toward the edge of the table. I reacted quickly, dropping my notepad and catching the glass before it could shatter on the expensive floor. But the freezing ice water sloshed out, soaking the entire front of my white uniform shirt. Savannah gasped dramatically, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh, watch what you are doing, Jocelyn," she scolded, her voice dripping with fake exaggerated concern. "Honestly, the service here is completely unacceptable. I really should speak to the manager about how clumsy and unprofessional you are. We are trying to have an important business meeting here, and you are ruining the atmosphere." I stood there, freezing water dripping down my chest, staring into my sister's triumphant eyes. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully asserted her dominance and proven her superiority to everyone in the room. She had absolutely no idea that her petty, childish display of power was nothing compared to the storm I was quietly building in the dark. I gave her a curt nod, turned on my heel, and walked back to the kitchen, leaving them to their pathetic illusion of grandeur. I pushed through the heavy wooden swinging doors of the kitchen, the icy water soaking through my thin uniform shirt and sending a sharp chill down my spine. I grabbed a clean linen towel from the prep station and began to aggressively dry the fabric. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. There was no panic, only a deep, calculating focus. I knew Savannah would not let it end with a simple spilled glass. She needed a spectacle. She needed a public execution. Within 2 minutes, my floor manager, a high-strung man named David, burst through the kitchen doors. His face was flushed with panic. He grabbed my arm, his voice a frantic hiss. "What on earth did you do to Table 7? The VIP guest is demanding you be fired immediately. She claims you deliberately dumped a pitcher of ice water on her couture gown." I followed David back out to the edge of the main dining hall. Savannah was standing by the table, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. She was dabbing her perfectly dry designer dress with a napkin, her voice pitched to carry across the room without sounding like an outright shout. Mr. Caldwell looked incredibly uncomfortable, while Preston stood beside his fiancée, shaking his head in mock disappointment. Then the heavy brass doors of the country club lobby swung open. My breath caught in my throat for a fraction of a second. Walking through the entrance, radiating their usual brand of arrogant entitlement, were my parents. Harrison and Diane had arrived. Preston must have invited them to celebrate the closing of his supposed massive investment deal with Mr. Caldwell. My mother spotted the commotion instantly. Her eyes locked onto me, taking in my black apron, my plastic name tag, and my damp white shirt. The color completely drained from her face. It was not concern for my well-being. It was pure, unadulterated horror at the realization that her wealthy country club peers might realize her eldest daughter was serving them appetizers. Harrison marched over, his heavy footsteps thudding against the polished marble floor. Diane followed closely behind, her hands clutching her designer handbag as if it were a life preserver. They did not ask what happened. They did not ask if I was okay. They immediately formed a defensive wall around Savannah. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison demanded, his voice a harsh, low whisper directed entirely at me. His eyes darted around the room, paranoid that his wealthy friends might be watching the scene unfold. "Dad, it is awful!" Savannah whined, grabbing his arm and leaning into him like a frightened child. "Jocelyn is working here as a waitress. Can you believe it? She just completely ruined our business dinner. She deliberately threw water all over me because she is jealous of my success. I am so humiliated." David, the manager, practically bowed to my father. "Mr. Harrison, I am so sorry. We had no idea this server would cause such a disruption to your family. We will handle this immediately." Diane stepped forward, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at my chest. Her eyes were filled with absolute disgust. "I cannot believe you are doing this to us, Jocelyn," she spat, her voice venomous. "You drop out of our lives, you refuse to be a part of this family, and now you show up here just to sabotage your sister's crucial investment meeting." I looked right at her, keeping my posture entirely rigid. "I work here, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am working a second job to pay for my master's degree. I did not drop water on anyone." She knocked the glass over herself. "Do not you dare call me a liar!" Savannah shrieked, clutching Preston's arm. Harrison stepped closer to me, his physical presence looming and threatening. "Stop making excuses for your miserable failures," he growled. "You are a complete embarrassment to everything we have built. Look at you. You are 31 years old, and you are clearing plates for tips. You have absolutely no ambition, no future, and no class." Diane grabbed her husband's arm, looking at me as if I were a diseased animal that had wandered indoors. "I want you out of this dining room right now," she commanded, her tone vibrating with rage. "Do not wear this cheap uniform and embarrass our family in front of Preston's partner ever again. You are a disgrace to the family name. You are nothing but a bitter, resentful failure who cannot stand to see her younger sister thrive." Preston chimed in, adjusting his expensive cuffs with a condescending smirk. "It really is pathetic, Jocelyn. If you needed money so badly, you should have just asked. We could have given you a few dollars to wash our cars instead of you coming here and ruining a multi-million-dollar negotiation. Just leave before you make yourself look even more desperate." Mr. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly wanting no part of this family drama. Harrison immediately pivoted, turning his back on me to address the older investor. His tone switched instantly from venomous rage to incredibly slick, apologetic charm. "Mr. Caldwell, I am so terribly sorry for this disruption. We have had some severe psychological trouble with my eldest daughter for years. She has a history of erratic behavior and intense jealousy. Please do not let her unfortunate outburst reflect poorly on Savannah and Preston. They are brilliant young entrepreneurs with incredibly bright futures." I stood there perfectly still, listening to my own father actively destroy my character to a complete stranger just to secure funding for the sister who had never worked an honest day in her life. He was willing to label me as mentally unstable just to protect his own ego and Savannah's fraudulent business venture. The manager pulled a final paycheck from his breast pocket, practically shoving it into my chest. "You are terminated," David said quietly, desperate to appease the wealthy members. "Please leave the premises through the service exit and turn in your apron to security." I took the envelope. I did not argue. I did not plead for my job. I looked at the five of them standing there in their expensive designer clothes, bound together by their shared delusion and their mutual hatred of me. They felt powerful. They felt completely untouchable. They thought they had just put me in my place and secured their own victory. I folded the envelope and slid it into my pocket. I looked my father dead in the eyes, then shifted my gaze to my mother, and finally to Savannah and Preston. I will be leaving now, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a ticking clock. I hope your investment goes exactly the way you deserve. I untied my black apron, let it drop to the pristine marble floor, right at Savannah's feet, and walked toward the service exit. I did not look back. I did not shed a single tear. Let them have their luxurious country club dinner. Let them celebrate their fake wealth and their stolen investments. I was going back to my computer, because tonight they had just given me all the motivation I needed to destroy their empire completely. The heavy brass-bound doors swung shut behind me, instantly muting the soft classical music of the main dining room. I stood in the dimly lit service corridor, the damp fabric of my uniform clinging uncomfortably to my skin. I intended to walk straight to the employee locker room, gather my belongings, and disappear into the night. But a sudden sharp shift in the tone of voices from Table 7 made me stop dead in my tracks. The acoustics of the country club were designed to minimize noise, but the service corridor shared a thin wooden partition directly behind their booth. If I stood perfectly still, I could hear every single word. Preston was operating in full damage control mode. His arrogant, condescending tone had vanished, replaced by the desperate, fast-talking cadence of a junior banker trying to save a sinking pitch. "Mr. Caldwell, I apologize again for that unpleasantness," Preston said, his voice carrying clearly through the wall. "You have to understand we are a family strictly dedicated to excellence. We simply do not tolerate dead weight, which is exactly why we are so heavily invested in Savannah's vision. She is the real deal." Caldwell sounded deeply skeptical. His voice was low and gravely. "Family drama aside, Preston, I need to look at the hard numbers. The market for vegan cosmetics is heavily saturated. Your initial pitch mentioned strong liquidity, but I am seeing massive red flags in your Q3 projections. I need absolute assurance that your capital is secure before I write a check." This is where Preston, fueled by his fragile ego and a desperate need to look like a financial powerhouse in front of his future father-in-law, made the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of his entire life. "Our capital is absolutely ironclad," Sir Preston boasted. "In fact, Harrison's commitment to this venture is so strong that he just finalized a home equity line of credit on the primary family estate. $300,000 fully approved and injected directly into our operating budget just last week. We have serious skin in the game. A home equity line of credit. A HELOC." My breath hitched in my throat. I pressed my back flat against the wooden partition, my analytical brain immediately kicking into overdrive. Harrison despised leveraging personal property. For my entire life, his absolute biggest point of pride was that he owned his massive suburban mansion outright. He bragged about being completely debt-free to anyone who would listen at his golf games. For him to quietly take out a $300,000 lien against his primary residence meant only one thing. Savannah's cosmetics company was not just struggling, it was hemorrhaging cash. It was a massive financial sinkhole, and my parents were desperately trying to plug the leak before it dragged their precious reputation under. I reached into my pocket, my fingers quickly finding my phone. I pulled it out, unlocked the screen, and hit the bright red record button on my voice memo app. I held the device close to the wall, making sure the microphone captured the audio perfectly. "Preston, maybe we should keep the internal financing details private," my mother whispered sharply. I could hear the sheer panic vibrating in Diane's voice at the disclosure. "Nonsense." Diane Harrison quickly interjected, trying his best to mask his wife's anxiety with forced confidence. "Mr. Caldwell values transparency in his business partners. Yes, I leveraged the house. It is simply a strategic bridge loan. The funds are parked safely at Vanguard National Bank, ready to be deployed for our European marketing push next month. Vanguard National Bank. I stared at the blinking red timer on my recording app. Preston, in his desperate attempt to sound like a Wall Street heavy hitter, had just handed me the exact blueprints to their financial destruction. They were blatantly lying to Mr. Caldwell about a European marketing push. You do not leverage a fully paid-off family home for a marketing campaign unless your accounts payable are so deeply in the red that suppliers are actively threatening to cut you off. Preston kept digging the hole deeper, completely oblivious to his own monumental stupidity. Exactly, Harrison. Vanguard gave us an incredibly favorable variable interest rate because of the estate's high valuation. The $300,000 covers our immediate manufacturing overhead and leaves a very comfortable cash cushion. Savannah's brand is a guaranteed unicorn, Mr. Caldwell. We are just optimizing our capital stack to maximize your return on investment. Optimizing the capital stack. It was typical empty finance jargon designed to sound sophisticated, but to a data analyst, it was a glaring siren. They were using a variable rate line of credit to fund high-risk operational expenses. If Savannah's sales did not skyrocket immediately to cover the massive monthly minimum payments, the interest would compound violently. Vanguard would eventually foreclose on the house to recover the debt. They had essentially bet the roof over their heads on a failing vegan lipstick brand, run by a woman who could barely balance her own checkbook. I tapped the screen, stopping the recording, and immediately uploaded the audio file to my encrypted cloud server. The ice water soaking my shirt no longer felt cold. I felt a sudden surge of pure, electrifying adrenaline coursing through my veins. They thought they had destroyed me tonight. They thought taking my minimum wage job would leave me helpless, crying and crawling back to them for scraps. Instead, they had just handed me the exact weapon I would use to dismantle their entire lives. I pushed away from the wall and walked briskly to the employee locker room. I stripped off the damp uniform, leaving it in a crumpled heap on the wooden bench. I changed into my worn jeans and my oversized gray sweater. As I tied my sneakers, my mind was already racing miles ahead of them. I did not just have a recording of their desperate financial state. I had hard data. I had the specific bank name. I had the exact loan amount and the underlying asset they used to secure it. This was the exact real-world scenario I needed for my master thesis. I had been struggling for weeks to find a practical application for my financial technology algorithm. I was currently building an artificial intelligence model designed to predict bad debt and high-risk loan defaults before the major banks even realized the accounts were in danger. Now I had my perfect test subjects. I would use Savannah's failing company and Harrison's reckless loan as the foundational data points to train my predictive model. I walked out of the service exit and into the biting November air. The night sky was pitch black, but my path forward had never been clearer. I pulled my collar up against the wind, a cold smile forming on my lips. I was going to graduate at the top of my class. I was going to build my predictive algorithm into a massive company. And when the time was right, I was going to use my wealth to buy their debt right out from under them. I reached my tiny, unheated studio apartment just past midnight. The space was barely larger than a walk-in closet, a stark contrast to the sprawling suburban mansion my parents had just secretly mortgaged. I did not bother turning on the main overhead light. I dropped my coat on the single chair in the corner, sat down at my cramped desk, and woke up my custom-built computer. The soft blue glow of the monitors illuminated the room. I pulled up the audio file I had just recorded and played it back. Preston's arrogant voice filled the small space, bragging about optimizing the capital stack with a variable rate line of credit from Vanguard National Bank. I listened to it 3 times. With every playback, the exhaustion in my muscles evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp, hyper-focused energy. They had handed me the missing puzzle piece for my master's thesis. For months, my predictive financial technology algorithm had been lacking a compelling real-world baseline to train its machine learning core. I needed a flawless example of hidden toxic debt, a scenario where outward social signaling masked severe internal financial decay. Savannah's Vanity Cosmetics brand was the holy grail of bad data. I opened my code editor and began building a new dataset. I created a profile for a hypothetical retail company operating in a highly saturated market. I inputted the exact variables Preston had carelessly leaked. High initial capital injection, massive operational burn rate 0, proven market traction, and a foundational loan secured by an overvalued residential asset on a variable interest rate. I coded the algorithm to simulate the compounding interest pressure over a 36-month period, cross-referencing it with average marketing expenditure for new cosmetic lines. The computer whirred heavily as it processed the simulation. When the results flashed on the screen, a cold thrill ran down my spine. The algorithm predicted a 98% probability of total catastrophic default within exactly 3 years. The math was completely unforgiving. Savannah was burning through cash faster than she could ever generate it, and the variable rate from Vanguard would eventually choke them out. They were a ticking financial time bomb. That night became the catalyst for the next 2 years of my life. I quit my job at the country club. I did not need it anymore. I took my preliminary algorithm straight to my university's technology incubator program. I pitched my software as a proactive risk management tool for institutional lenders designed to flag high-risk loan defaults long before traditional credit scores ever caught the scent of trouble. I used Savannah's exact business model, heavily anonymized, of course, as my primary case study. The presentation room was packed with visiting venture capitalists and finance professors. When I demonstrated how easily traditional banking metrics could be fooled by superficial assets like a paid-off suburban house, while my artificial intelligence model saw right through the illusion to the toxic cash flow underneath, the room went entirely silent. Then the bidding war began. Within 6 weeks, my master's thesis project transformed from a theoretical academic exercise into a fully funded Silicon Valley startup. I secured $3 million in seed capital. I hired a small elite team of developers and data scientists operating out of a sleek warehouse office downtown. We worked relentlessly, feeding the algorithm millions of data points, refining its predictive capabilities until it was the most ruthless, accurate financial analysis tool on the market. We called the platform Apex Risk Analytics. We began licensing the software to mid-tier lending institutions, helping them identify and offload toxic debt portfolios. The revenue generated was staggering. By my final year of the master's program, Apex was valued at over $40 million. I was the majority shareholder and the chief executive officer. I had traded my cheap waitress uniform for tailored designer suits that made Savannah's country club attire look like fast fashion. I moved into a stunning penthouse overlooking the city skyline. But I never let the wealth soften my focus. I kept my lifestyle entirely off social media. I maintained a completely invisible public profile. To my family, I was still the miserable, estranged dropout who had vanished into obscurity. Every single time I felt exhausted, every time the pressure of running a rapidly scaling technology company threatened to overwhelm me, I would open that original audio file. I would listen to my mother calling me a disgrace. I would listen to my father telling an investor that I was mentally unstable. I would listen to Preston and Savannah laughing at my expense. It was the ultimate fuel. It kept my ambition burning at a white-hot intensity. As my graduation day approached, the final piece of my strategy fell perfectly into place. Apex Risk Analytics had grown so influential that major national banks started approaching us for portfolio acquisitions. We were no longer just advising on toxic debt. We had secured a massive $15 million funding round specifically designed to buy out high-risk loan portfolios at a deep discount, restructure them, and enforce harsh collections. One Tuesday morning, my lead acquisitions director walked into my glass-walled office. He handed me a thick confidential dossier from Vanguard National Bank. They were looking to offload a bundle of underperforming residential equity lines of credit that their internal systems had finally flagged as critically delinquent. The variable interest rates had spiked, and the borrowers were defaulting massively. I opened the file and scanned the addresses. My heart stopped, then hammered against my ribs with violent, triumphant force. Right there, buried on page 4 of the delinquent accounts list, was my parents' suburban address. The $300,000 line of credit had ballooned to nearly $450,000 due to unpaid compound interest and penalties. Savannah's cosmetic company had clearly collapsed entirely, dragging my parents' primary asset down into the abyss. Vanguard was preparing to issue formal notices of foreclosure within the next 90 days. I looked up at my acquisitions director, my expression completely unreadable. "Buy this entire Vanguard portfolio immediately," I ordered, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Pay whatever premium they ask to expedite the transfer of ownership. I want our company holding the exclusive deeds to these debts by the end of the week." He nodded, sensing the absolute finality in my tone, and immediately left the office to execute the wire transfers. I swiveled my leather chair around to face the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the bustling city. The timing was almost poetic. My official university graduation ceremony was scheduled for that exact weekend. The day I would finally put on a cap and gown to receive the master's degree, my parents had called a useless waste of money. They had no idea that the daughter they treated like a peasant had just legally purchased the very ground they walked on. The trap was set, the debt was mine, and I was about to deliver the most devastating graduation performance in family history. The sprawling campus of the university was bathed in brilliant golden sunlight that Saturday morning. It was a picture-perfect day for a commencement ceremony. Thousands of folding chairs lined the manicured green lawns, creating a massive sea of anticipation. Proud parents carried large bouquets of flowers, holding expensive cameras, and waving to their children. I stood near the massive stone pillars of the main auditorium entrance, dressed in a standard black graduation gown. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe style. I wore no flashy jewelry, no designer labels, and absolutely no outward markers of the massive wealth I had accumulated over the past 4 years. I looked exactly like the struggling, invisible, debt-ridden student my family firmly believed me to be. Then I saw them. It was impossible not to. Harrison and Diane marched through the dense crowd, as if they personally owned the university grounds. Diane wore a wide-brimmed hat and a loud, overly expensive floral dress that screamed for desperate attention from everyone around her. Harrison wore his usual tailored suit, though my highly trained eyes immediately noticed the fabric was slightly frayed at the cuffs. It was a subtle, almost invisible sign of their collapsing financial reality, a reality I knew intimately. Walking right behind them was Savannah, clinging tightly to Preston's arm. Preston was wearing his graduation gown, his cap sitting askew on his head with an arrogant, entitled tilt. He was graduating from the exact same business program today. I knew for a fact, having reviewed the public academic registry, that he had barely scraped by with a standard passing grade. Yet, judging by the way my parents beamed at him and cleared a path for him, you would think he had just cured a major global disease. Savannah was carrying a designer handbag, but I recognized the specific model. It was from 3 seasons ago. The cracks in their wealthy facade were everywhere if you knew exactly where to look. Savannah spotted me first. Her forced picture-perfect smile instantly dropped, replaced by a sneer of pure, unfiltered distaste. She tapped her mother's arm and pointed a manicured finger directly in my direction. Diane stopped dead in her tracks. The entire group altered their path, steering deliberately away from the main entrance and heading straight toward my quiet corner by the stone pillars. They were not approaching to offer congratulations. They were coming to ensure I knew my place before the ceremony began. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Diane said, her voice dripping with absolute venom as she stopped a few feet away from me. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of undisguised contempt. "I am honestly shocked they let you walk today, Jocelyn. I assumed you would have dropped out years ago when your little minimum wage funds dried up." I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. "Hello, Mother." "Hello, Harrison." I did not offer a smile. I did not offer a hug. I gave them nothing but a blank, unreadable stare. Savannah let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed against the stone pillars. You have a lot of nerve showing up here, Jocelyn, especially today. Today is about celebrating real success. She patted Preston's chest affectionately, looking at him with exaggerated adoration. Preston has already secured a junior vice president role at his investment banking firm. He is destined for the executive board before he turns 35. What exactly are you doing? Still entering data into spreadsheets for hourly pay? Preston adjusted his academic collar, looking at me with a sickening display of overwhelming pity. Now, Savannah, be nice. It is a tough economy out there for people without real connections or capital. Though I have to admit, Jocelyn, seeing you here is a bit embarrassing for all of us. This program is highly competitive. Did you have to take out another high-interest predatory loan just to buy that cheap polyester gown? You really should have stayed at the country club pouring water. Harrison shook his head in sheer disappointment, refusing to even make direct eye contact with me. You always were a massive financial liability, Jocelyn. I warned you 4 years ago that going back to school was a total waste of resources. Now look at you, standing entirely alone in a corner while your sister and brother-in-law build an actual empire and a real future. You are a textbook example of bad investments. Diane took a deliberate step closer to me, invading my personal space. She lowered her voice into a harsh, threatening whisper designed to cut deep. You are probably drowning in debt just to buy this meaningless piece of paper. Listen to me very carefully right now. Preston is networking with some highly influential venture capitalists today. Do not you dare approach our family during the reception. Stay far away from Preston so people do not know he has a poor, pathetic sister-in-law. We will not let your miserable, struggling existence drag down our pristine family reputation. The absolute audacity of her words would have completely crushed the 29-year-old version of myself. It would have sent me running to the nearest restroom to cry in a locked stall. But the 33-year-old woman standing before her felt nothing but a profound, almost terrifying sense of calm control. I knew exactly what was sitting in my secure corporate digital vault. I knew that the sprawling suburban mansion they would drive back to tonight legally belonged to my company. I knew that Savannah's supposedly thriving vegan cosmetics empire was a smoldering pile of toxic debt currently being investigated by federal tax authorities. They were standing on a trapdoor and I was holding the lever. Do not worry, Diane, I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion whatsoever. I have absolutely no intention of associating with Preston today. I would hate to attach my professional name to his dismal academic performance. Preston's face flushed a deep, angry red. Excuse me, I am graduating from a top-tier business school today, with a grade point average that barely clears the minimum graduation requirement, I replied smoothly, holding his furious gaze without blinking. But congratulations on your junior entry-level role. I am sure you will fit right in with the other average performers. Savannah gasped, stepping in front of her husband defensively, her face twisting with rage. You are just a jealous, bitter loser. You have nobody here to celebrate with you because you pushed your real family away with your toxic attitude. You are going to die alone and broke, Jocelyn. Enough, Harrison commanded, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. We are wasting our breath on her. Let us go find our VIP seating. We are not going to let this miserable failure ruin our celebration. We have important people to meet. Diane gave me one final look of pure disgust, looking down her nose at me. Remember what I said, Jocelyn. Stay far away from us. You are completely invisible to this family. They turned as a unified front and marched away, heading toward the premium guest seating area reserved for families of graduating students. I watched them walk away, my face completely impassive. They walked with their heads held high, projecting a fake aura of untouchable wealth and superiority to the surrounding crowds. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking blindly straight to the edge of a devastating cliff. I checked my sleek, understated luxury wristwatch. It was almost time. I turned away from the main seating area and walked deliberately toward the private staging room, reserved for university faculty and special honorees. As I entered the quiet, air-conditioned hallway, my personal corporate lawyer, Gideon Cole, stepped out from the shadows of an alcove. Gideon was a tall, imposing man in a sharp charcoal suit. He carried a heavy leather briefcase. Inside that briefcase were the physical notarized copies of the Vanguard debt portfolios my company had officially acquired 48 hours ago. "Everything is completely secured, Jocelyn," Gideon said, his voice calm and highly professional. "The final wire transfer cleared this morning. You hold the exclusive deeds to their entire debt portfolio. The formal foreclosure notices are fully drafted and ready for execution the moment you give the signal." "Thank you, Gideon," I replied, smoothing out the front of my black graduation gown. "Are you sitting in the donor box?" Right in the front row, he smiled faintly, a dangerous glint in his eyes. I would not miss this speech for the world. I nodded and walked toward the heavy velvet curtains that led to the backstage area of the grand auditorium. The roar of the massive crowd outside echoed through the corridors. Thousands of students and their families were taking their seats. My parents were out there right now, likely bragging to the people sitting next to them about Preston's incredibly average degree. They were basking in their manufactured glory, fully believing that they had successfully discarded me like worthless trash. I reached the backstage holding area where the highest-ranking university faculty were lining up for the processional. The air was electric with anticipation. I walked past the other students, past the standard graduates, and took my place at the very front of the line, right next to the university dean, Dr. Aris Thorne. I took a deep, steadying breath. The 4 years of silent, agonizing labor were officially over. The time for hiding in the shadows was permanently done. I was about to walk out onto that stage and burn their entire fake world to the ground in front of 5,000 people. The heavy velvet curtains parted with a mechanical hum, revealing a blinding wash of stage lights and a wall of deafening sound. I stepped out onto the polished wooden floor of the main stage, walking shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Aris Thorne and the senior faculty members of the university. The sheer magnitude of the auditorium was breathtaking. 5,000 people filled the plush red seats, a massive ocean of proud parents, expectant students, and prestigious alumni. I took my designated seat in the front row of the stage, directly adjacent to the main podium. From this elevated vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire venue. My eyes immediately scanned the premium VIP section, reserved for high-level donors and distinguished guests. I spotted Gideon Cole sitting comfortably in the front row of the donor box, his heavy leather briefcase resting securely at his feet. He caught my eye and gave a single firm nod. The legal trap was locked and loaded. Then my gaze shifted to the general family seating area. It did not take long to locate them. Harrison and Diane had aggressively pushed their way to the front of their designated section, ensuring they had the best possible angle to photograph Preston. Savannah was busy taking selfies, pouting her lips for the camera, while completely ignoring the solemn dignity of the academic procession. Preston sat next to her, looking incredibly smug, checking his expensive watch, as if this entire ceremony was merely a stepping stone in his inevitable rise to greatness. They were completely oblivious to the fact that I was seated on the stage, a designated area reserved strictly for university leadership and top academic honorees. They had not even bothered to look in my direction. In their minds, I was probably standing in the back row of the bleachers, drowning in a sea of average, struggling students. The Grand Symphony Orchestra concluded their opening performance, and a heavy hush fell over the massive crowd. Dr. Aris Thorne, a highly respected economist and the dean of the university, approached the heavy mahogany podium. He adjusted his microphone, his commanding presence immediately demanding absolute silence from the 5,000 attendees. "Welcome, distinguished faculty, proud families, and the graduating class." Dr. Thorne began, his deep voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Today we gather to celebrate academic excellence, relentless perseverance, and the future leaders of our global economy. Every year, this institution produces brilliant minds who go on to shape the financial sector. However, this graduating class is exceptionally historic." Down in the audience, I watched Preston lean forward in his seat, a pathetic look of eager anticipation washing over his face. He actually thought his mediocre banking internship was about to get a public shout-out. Savannah stopped taking photos and pointed her phone toward the stage, ready to capture her husband's imaginary moment of glory. Harrison and Diane sat up perfectly straight, puffing out their chests with unearned pride, ready to bask in the validation they craved so desperately. Dr. Thorne gripped the edges of the podium, his expression turning incredibly serious and filled with profound admiration. Traditionally, universities teach students how to navigate the existing corporate world, he continued. But occasionally, we encounter a student of such monumental caliber that they do not just navigate the industry, they completely disrupt it. Today, our highest academic honor, the Valedictorian Award, goes to a student who embodies the absolute pinnacle of innovation and grit. The massive auditorium was pin-drop silent. Everyone was waiting for the name. This particular student did not come from immense privilege. Dr. Thorne said, his words striking like precision missiles across the silent room. She did not rely on family wealth or nepotism to secure her place in the financial sector. Instead, she worked quietly in the shadows. While completing her rigorous academic curriculum, she independently developed a proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm designed to predict catastrophic institutional debt. Her groundbreaking software has single-handedly revolutionized how major banks process and offload high-risk loan portfolios. I watched the exact moment pure confusion began to wash over my family. Preston's arrogant smirk faltered instantly. The description Dr. Thorne was giving sounded absolutely nothing like the standard investment banking track Preston was on. Harrison tilted his head, his brow furrowing, as he tried to process the sheer scale of the accomplishments being listed. Diane looked around the room, desperately trying to figure out which wealthy elite family this prodigy belonged to. Her academic brilliance is only matched by her staggering real-world success, Dr. Thorne announced, his voice rising with palpable excitement. Just last month, before even receiving her diploma, her financial technology startup officially closed a Series A funding round. It is my absolute distinct honor to present your valedictorian, the founder of a fintech startup that just received a $15 million investment from Silicon Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome Jocelyn. My full name echoed through the massive speakers hitting the walls of the auditorium like a sonic boom. For a split second, the world seemed to stand entirely still. Then the applause erupted around me, a deafening, thunderous roar from 5,000 people rising to their feet. But I did not hear the cheering. I tuned out the flashing cameras and the standing ovation. My eyes were locked entirely on Section 4 Row G. The physical reaction of my family was a masterpiece of human devastation. They literally turned to stone. Diane let out a sharp, audible gasp that I could almost see ripple through her entire body. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes bulging out of her skull as she stared up at the stage. She grabbed Harrison's arm so hard her knuckles turned completely white. Harrison looked as if he had just been struck by a high-voltage electrical current. His rigid spine locked, his mouth falling open in a grotesque mask of sheer unadulterated horror. All the arrogant color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, pale ghost. Savannah dropped her expensive smartphone. I actually saw the device slip from her manicured fingers and clatter onto the concrete floor, completely ignored. Her eyes darted wildly from Dr. Thorne to me, and back again, her brain violently rejecting the reality unfolding in front of her. The sister she had mocked just 30 minutes ago, the sister she had deliberately splashed with ice water 2 years prior, was currently standing under the brightest spotlight in the room, being hailed as a Silicon Valley tech millionaire. Preston looked like he was going to vomit. His arrogant posture collapsed inward. His eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered shock as he stared at the woman he had called a pathetic, desperate failure. He was a low-level bank employee celebrating a cheap degree while I had just been announced as an apex predator of the financial world. I stood up slowly from my premium leather chair on the stage. I smoothed down the front of my black gown with meticulous, deliberate care. I walked toward the heavy mahogany podium with the steady, measured grace of an executioner stepping up to the block. I did not rush. I let them feel every single agonizing second of my ascent. I wanted the reality of my success to crush them completely before I even opened my mouth. I reached the podium and stood beside Dr. Thorne. He handed me the heavy leather-bound diploma case containing the highest academic honor the university could bestow. I took it in my hands, feeling the solid weight of my own relentless survival. I looked out over the massive sea of cheering people, the flashbulbs lighting up the room like a lightning storm. Then I locked my gaze directly onto my parents' terrified, bloodless faces. They were staring up at me, absolutely paralyzed by the magnitude of their own miscalculation. The daughter they had thrown away, the one they had deemed a financial liability, was now worth more than their entire combined existence. I offered them a slow, freezing, razor-sharp smile from the stage. The trap had successfully sprung, and the absolute destruction of their fake empire was officially underway. The applause rolled through the massive auditorium in deafening waves, echoing against the high vaulted ceilings. I stood at the podium, letting the sound wash over me, completely anchored in the present moment. Beside me, Dr. Eris Thorne raised his hands, signaling for the crowd to settle down. It took nearly a full minute for the thunderous standing ovation to subside. People were shifting in their seats, buzzing with adrenaline, captivated by the sheer scale of the success story they were witnessing. Down in the audience, Harrison and Diane remained frozen, their faces completely drained of color. But the true devastation had not even begun. Dr. Thorne leaned back into the microphone, his expression sharpening with an almost predatory academic pride. He was not finished. I had specifically provided his office with an approved press release regarding my company just 48 hours prior, knowing he would use it to highlight the university's prestige. While securing a $15 million venture capital investment is a monumental achievement on its own. Dr. Thorne continued, his deep voice carrying a new edge of intensity. Jocelyn and her team at Apex Risk Analytics did not simply park that capital in a bank. They immediately deployed it in one of the most aggressive and brilliant financial maneuvers this institution has seen in a decade. A heavy anticipatory silence fell over the 5,000 attendees. Down in Section 4, I watched Preston physically tense. As a junior investment banker, his ears naturally perked up at the mention of aggressive financial maneuvers. He leaned slightly forward, his arrogant demeanor entirely stripped away, replaced by the nervous, calculating twitch of a desperate finance worker. Just this past Thursday, Dr. Thorne announced, his words ringing out with absolute clarity. Apex Risk Analytics executed a massive corporate buyout. They officially acquired the entire highly toxic, underperforming bad debt portfolio from Vanguard National Bank. The name of the bank dropped into the auditorium like a live grenade. I kept my eyes locked in a dead stare on my family. The physical reaction was immediate and violently visceral. Diane let out a choked, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her throat as if she were suddenly suffocating. Harrison violently jerked backward in his premium folding chair. His jaw snapped shut, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The word Vanguard had hit him with the force of a speeding freight train. Dr. Thorne kept speaking, completely unaware that he was narrating the real-time financial execution of my family. By utilizing her proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm, Jocelyn successfully identified a massive bundle of residential home equity lines of credit that were critically defaulting due to variable interest rate spikes, he explained to the captivated audience. Vanguard National Bank had failed to accurately assess the extreme risk of these specific accounts. Borrowers had recklessly leveraged their primary suburban estates to fund high-risk, failing business ventures. Jocelyn saw the structural decay that traditional bankers missed. Her company purchased this distressed portfolio at a strategic premium, effectively seizing total ownership of the underlying residential deeds. Preston understood it first. I could see the exact mathematical equation solving itself behind his wide, terrified eyes. He knew Harrison had leveraged the family mansion through a Vanguard home equity line of credit to fund Savannah's failing vegan cosmetics brand. He knew Savannah had been defaulting on the massive interest payments. And as an investment banker, he knew exactly what happens when a private risk analysis firm buys a defaulted residential debt portfolio. They do not renegotiate, they foreclose. Preston turned his head slowly toward Harrison, his face contorted in absolute horror. He grabbed Savannah's arm with a bruising grip, shaking her violently as he whispered frantically into her ear. Savannah looked wildly confused, at first her vapid mind unable to process complex financial jargon. But as Preston continued to hiss the reality of the situation to her, pointing a shaking finger up at the stage where I stood, her fake tan seemed to literally peel away. She clutched her designer handbag against her chest, her mouth trembling as she stared up at me in pure, unadulterated terror. They are going to initiate aggressive asset forfeiture protocols starting this coming Monday, Dr. Thorne concluded, beaming with absolute pride. Jocelyn is not just predicting the future of financial technology, she is actively cleaning up the reckless, toxic debt that plagues our economy. She is holding irresponsible borrowers strictly accountable. Please join me one last time in congratulating a true visionary. The crowd erupted again, even louder this time. Business students cheered wildly, inspired by the ruthless corporate takeover. Faculty members nodded in deep respect. I stepped up to the microphone, resting my hands firmly on the polished wood of the podium. The noise slowly faded as I looked out over the sea of faces, my gaze never once leaving the pathetic, trembling group in row G. "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," I said, my voice projecting crisp and cold across the auditorium. "And thank you to this institution for teaching me the true value of calculated leverage. When I started my journey here 4 years ago, I had absolutely nothing. I was told by people who should have supported me that I was a complete liability. I was told that investing in my education was throwing money out the window." Down in the audience, Harrison closed his eyes, his broad shoulders collapsing inward as the weight of his own cruel words from 4 years ago crashed down upon him. Diane was visibly shaking her manicured fingers, digging mercilessly into her husband's expensive suit jacket. "But failure is an excellent teacher," I continued smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly measured and professional. "It taught me to spot a bad investment from miles away. It taught me that people will smile in your face while building their entire lives on a foundation of toxic, unpayable debt. My company, Apex Risk Analytics, was founded on a very simple, unbreakable principle. People who borrow money they cannot repay, people who leverage their homes for cheap vanity projects, will eventually have to pay the absolute highest price." I paused, letting the silence stretch out, allowing the threat to sink directly into the bones of my family. "Starting on Monday morning, my firm will be executing hundreds of foreclosure notices across the state," I announced, staring dead into Savannah's wide, terrified eyes. "We will be seizing the estates of those who thought they could outsmart the system. We will be taking the keys to the mansions they used to secure their fraudulent lifestyles. Accountability is not always pleasant, but it is always necessary. Thank you for this immense honor." I stepped back from the podium, grasping my leather-bound diploma. The audience roared with approval, completely oblivious to the deeply personal, targeted assassination I had just delivered. They thought I was giving a fierce, motivational corporate speech. They did not know I was reading my parents their eviction notice. As I walked back to my seat on the stage, I caught Gideon Cole's eye in the VIP donor box. The brilliant lawyer raised a single eyebrow and gave me a slow, predatory smile. He tapped his heavy leather briefcase twice. The message was clear. The foreclosure documents were fully drafted, legally binding, and ready for immediate deployment. Down in the family seating area, complete chaos was silently breaking out. Harrison was gripping his chest, gasping for air, as if he were having a cardiac event. Diane was sobbing, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Preston had completely distanced himself from Savannah, sliding his chair inches away from his wife as if her financial ruin were a contagious disease. Savannah was rocking back and forth, staring at me with a look of absolute paralyzed dread. The ceremony proceeded, but the damage was permanently done. I sat in my premium leather chair on the stage, my posture perfect, my expression totally serene. I had promised myself 4 years ago that I would not return to their house until I held the deed to it. I looked down at the physical manifestation of my hard work, resting in my lap, then looked out at the broken, miserable remnants of my toxic family. The sweet, metallic taste of absolute victory coated my tongue. The graduation ceremony was over, but the ruthless collection of their debts was just beginning. The graduation ceremony formally concluded with a thunderous roar of applause, but down in Section 4, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy. Diane gripped Harrison's arm so tightly, her perfectly manicured nails nearly pierced his expensive suit jacket. All the arrogant color had completely drained from her face. Her skin was a sickly ashen gray. Harrison Vanguard. Diane whispered, her voice trembling so violently it barely sounded human. Her eyes were locked onto the stage wide with a paralyzing terror. That is the exact bank where we mortgaged the house for Savannah. Harrison tried to pull his arm away, but his own hands were shaking uncontrollably. Keep your voice down, Diane, he hissed through gritted teeth. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He looked around wildly terrified that the wealthy families sitting in the adjacent rows might have heard his wife's frantic confession. There must be some mistake. She is just trying to scare us. She does not have that kind of capital. But Harrison knew he was lying to himself. He had seen the authority with which I stood at the podium. He had heard the university dean validate every single word I said. The terrifying reality was already settling like concrete in his stomach. I was no longer the desperate daughter begging for a student loan cosigner. I was the absolute highest creditor holding the legal deed to his entire suburban empire. On the stage, the faculty began the formal processional exit. I stood up, adjusting my graduation gown, and walked in line with the senior professors. I kept my head high, my expression a mask of absolute unshakable calm. I did not look back at the audience. I did not need to. I knew exactly what was happening in the aisles below. The panicked scrambling, the frantic whispers, the sheer desperation to intercept me before I could leave the building. I bypassed the general student reception area entirely. Instead, I was escorted by campus security directly into the private alumni donor lounge, a secluded hall featuring heavy oak doors and crystal chandeliers. Gideon Cole was already waiting by the mahogany bar. He had bypassed the crowds with the efficiency of a seasoned corporate shark. Brilliant execution, Jocelyn Gideon said, handing me a glass of sparkling water. He placed his heavy leather briefcase on a nearby table and unclasped the brass locks. The timing was absolutely flawless. Their account is officially past the 90-day delinquency mark. The grace period expired at midnight last night. I took a slow sip of the water, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. Do you have the physical file ready? Gideon pulled out a thick red folder labeled with Harrison's full legal name. Vanguard transferred the complete ledger. The principal loan was $300,000. With the compounded variable interest from Savannah's, missed operational payments, late fees, and institutional penalties, the current outstanding balance is exactly $452,890, payable immediately in full. I took the folder, feeling the heavy weight of their financial ruin in my hands. Before I could respond, the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge burst open. Security stepped forward, but I raised my hand to wave them off. Harrison and Diane stormed into the room, pushing past the velvet ropes. Savannah trailed behind them, her face stained with ruined mascara, clutching Preston's arm for dear life. Preston looked like a man walking to his own execution. His eyes darted nervously around the luxurious room, fully realizing the severe power dynamic shift. Jocelyn Harrison bellowed, trying desperately to project his usual booming authoritarian voice. But the sound cracked halfway through, betraying his absolute panic. "We need to talk to you right now. Tell me that speech was just some sort of exaggerated corporate metaphor. Tell me you did not actually buy the Vanguard residential portfolio." I stood perfectly still, holding the red folder against my side. I looked at Harrison with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. "I do not use metaphors when it comes to business, Harrison. I deal strictly in data, and your data is incredibly ugly." Diane stepped in front of her husband. Her fake upper-class composure had completely dissolved into frantic, shaking desperation. "Jocelyn, please. You are scaring your sister. This is a very cruel prank to pull on your family. We came here to support you today." "You came here to mock me," I corrected smoothly, my voice never rising above a conversational volume. "You came here to show off Preston's mediocre degree and ensure I knew my place as the family failure." You explicitly told me to stay away from you, so I would not ruin your pristine reputation. I am simply honoring your request. I am keeping this strictly professional. I stepped forward and tossed the heavy red folder onto the glass coffee table separating us. The document spilled out, displaying the official Vanguard transfer seals and the glaring red foreclosure notices. "Take a good look, Harrison," I said. "I own the debt. I own the mortgage. I own the very roof over your head. You leveraged your primary residence to fund a vanity project for a daughter who cannot even balance a basic budget. You gambled your entire estate and you lost." Harrison stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. His hands trembled as he picked up the top sheet. He read the final outstanding balance and his knees physically buckled. He fell heavily onto the nearest leather sofa, the air rushing out of him in a pained wheeze. 450,000, he gasped, clutching his chest. "This is impossible. The interest could not have compounded this fast." "It happens very fast when you miss 6 consecutive payments," Gideon Cole interjected, stepping up beside me. He adjusted his suit jacket, his tone dripping with lethal professionalism. "Your daughter Savannah completely stopped servicing the debt in April. Vanguard flagged the account as critically toxic. My client purchased it at a premium to ensure swift collection." Savannah began to sob loudly, her hands flying to her face. "It is not my fault," she wailed, turning to Preston. "The marketing agency overcharged me. The suppliers demanded upfront cash. I was going to pay it back as soon as the holiday sales came in." Preston stared at her, his eyes widening in absolute disgust. He snatched the financial breakdown from Harrison's trembling hand and scanned the numbers. The reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. He realized instantly that Savannah had been hiding the massive defaults from him. She had painted a picture of a thriving business, while secretly burying his future in $500,000 of toxic debt. "You lied to me," Preston hissed, taking a sudden, very deliberate step away from Savannah. "You told me the Vanguard line of credit was just a temporary operational bridge. You told me sales were up 30%. This company is completely insolvent." "Preston, please," Savannah begged, reaching out to grab his sleeve. "We can fix this. Dad will figure it out." Preston violently ripped his arm away from her grasp. "Figure it out? He just lost his house to the sister you have been relentlessly mocking for 4 years. There is nothing left to figure out, Savannah. You are financially ruined." The alliance was crumbling in real time. The golden couple, the pair my parents had idolized and funded, was turning on each other the second the money evaporated. Preston was an investment banker. He knew exactly how ruthless corporate collections could be. He was already calculating how fast he needed to distance himself from Savannah to save his own credit score. Diane dropped to her knees in front of me, completely abandoning her country club dignity. "Jocelyn, I am begging you. We are your parents. You cannot do this. We will lose everything. All our friends live in that neighborhood. Where will we go? You have millions of dollars now. You do not need our house. Please forgive the debt." I looked down at the woman who had handed Savannah $150,000 while sweeping my acceptance letter onto the floor. I looked at the woman who had called me a liability. "You are absolutely right, Diane. I do not need your house," I said, my voice dropping to a chilling razor-sharp whisper. "But I do demand a return on my investments. You made it very clear 4 years ago on Thanksgiving that family support is strictly transactional. You bet everything on Savannah because she had CEO potential. I am simply enforcing the terms of your own investment strategy." Savannah pushed past her mother, her face red and blotchy with tears and furious entitlement. "You are a monster, Jocelyn. You planned this whole thing just to destroy my life because you are jealous. You have always been jealous of me." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound completely devoid of humor. "Jealous of what, Savannah? Your fake company, your fraudulent lifestyle, your husband who is currently calculating the fastest route to a divorce lawyer. The only thing I am is your highest secured creditor." I turned my back on them and nodded to Gideon. "The legal proceedings begin on Monday at 9 in the morning," I announced, addressing Harrison one last time. "You have exactly 90 days to vacate the premises before the county sheriff arrives to forcibly remove your belongings. I suggest you start packing today. I hear moving boxes are quite affordable." I walked toward the private exit doors of the lounge, leaving my entire toxic family weeping and screaming at each other amidst the scattered foreclosure documents. I stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, breathing in the crisp, fresh air. I had paid my dues in the shadows, and now I owned the light. The weekend passed in a state of absolute, uninterrupted peace. For the first time in my adult life, my phone was not a source of dread. Instead, it became a fascinating psychological experiment. By Monday morning, the sheer volume of digital love bombing I received from Harrison and Diane was nothing short of pathological. They completely abandoned their furious, humiliated personas from the VIP lounge. In their place emerged two desperately affectionate parents, suffering from sudden aggressive amnesia regarding their impending financial doom. My inbox was flooded with dozens of sickeningly sweet messages. "Jocelyn, darling, we are just so incredibly proud of you," Diane texted at 6 in the morning. "Your father and I were up all night talking about your brilliant speech. We always knew you had a special spark." An hour later, Harrison followed up. "We need to celebrate your massive success properly, sweetheart. Let your old man take you to dinner at the club. We have so much to catch up on. Family is everything." There was absolutely no mention of the Vanguard debt portfolio. No acknowledgement of Savannah's catastrophic failure. No reference to the 90-day foreclosure notice ticking down like a bomb strapped to their front door. They honestly believed that if they simply showered me with enough fake praise and feigned parental pride, I would magically dissolve a $450,000 legal obligation out of a desperate lingering need for their approval. I did not block their numbers. I simply forwarded every single message to Gideon Cole to keep on file as evidence of their shifting mental states, then silenced the notifications. I had a company to run. On Wednesday afternoon, the performance escalated from digital harassment to a physical ambush. I was in the middle of a high-level board meeting reviewing our quarterly acquisition targets with my lead data scientists when the secure phone on the conference table buzzed. It was my head of building security. He sounded incredibly tense, lowering his voice as he spoke. "Ms. Jocelyn, I apologize for the interruption, but your parents are down in the main lobby. They are causing quite a disruption, claiming they have a scheduled surprise celebration for you." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my tailored navy suit. I instructed my team to continue the data review and made my way down to the ground floor. As the glass elevator descended, I looked out over the sprawling, ultra-modern atrium of my company headquarters. Harrison and Diane were standing directly in the center of the reception area, ensuring maximum visibility to every employee, executive, and client entering the building. They were holding absurdly massive, ostentatious floral arrangements featuring dozens of rare orchids and white lilies. Diane was wearing a bright, cheerful designer dress, loudly chatting with my bewildered front desk staff about how she had always nurtured my interest in technology since I was a little girl. Harrison was standing with his chest puffed out, beaming with fake paternal pride, shaking hands with a passing junior analyst, as if he were running for political office. It was a calculated, highly manipulative hostage situation disguised as a loving family reunion. They knew I valued my professional reputation above all else. They deliberately brought their circus into my corporate sanctuary, gambling on the assumption that I would never cause a public scene in front of my own staff. They expected me to play along, accept the flowers, smile for the cameras, and invite them up to my executive suite where they could corner me in private and beg for their mansion back. I stepped out of the elevator, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor. The moment Diane spotted me, she let out a high-pitched, theatrical squeal of delight that echoed across the massive lobby. "Jocelyn, sweetheart," she cried out, rushing forward with her arms wide open, shoving the massive floral arrangement toward my face. We could not wait another minute to celebrate our genius CEO. I did not step forward. I did not reach out to take the flowers. I stood completely rigid, my hands clasped loosely behind my back, exuding a freezing aura of absolute authority. Diane stopped awkwardly a few feet away, her arms suspended in the air, the heavy silence of the lobby instantly amplifying her failure to secure the hug. Harrison stepped up beside her, trying to force a hearty, booming laugh. Now do not be modest, Jocelyn. We know how hard you work. Your mother and I just wanted to show all these fine people how incredibly proud we are of our eldest daughter. We want to take you out for a celebratory lunch right now. Let us go upstairs and clear your schedule. I looked at the two of them, taking in their desperate, smiling faces. My employees were watching closely, pretending to sort through paperwork, but hanging on every word. You do not have an appointment, I stated, my voice ringing out crisp, cold, and entirely devoid of affection. This is a secure corporate facility. Harrison, not a country club dining room. We do not accommodate unannounced solicitors. Diane's fake smile twitched, her eyes darting nervously toward the receptionist. Jocelyn, do not be silly. We are your parents. We do not need an appointment to see our own flesh and blood. We just brought you these beautiful flowers to congratulate you on your little graduation. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to force them to lean in, ensuring the threat was delivered directly into their bones. You are not here to celebrate my degree, Diane. You are here because you are terrified. You thought bringing flowers to my lobby would publicly pressure me into dropping the foreclosure on your house. You thought I would be too embarrassed to turn you away in front of my staff. But you continually underestimate exactly who you are dealing with. Harrison leaned in, dropping the booming father act, his voice dropping to a desperate, panicked hiss. Jocelyn, please, Savannah is a wreck. Preston is actually meeting with divorce attorneys. The bank called me this morning to confirm the deed transfer. You are destroying our entire family over a petty grudge. Just take the flowers, let us go up to your office, and we can restructure this debt like a real family. I did not break eye contact. I raised my hand and signaled to the head of security, who immediately stepped forward alongside two large uniformed guards. I do not restructure toxic debt with delinquent borrowers, I replied smoothly, stepping backward to widen the gap between us. And I certainly do not negotiate real estate assets in my building lobby. Your 90-day eviction countdown is still ticking, Harrison. I suggest you spend less money on rare orchids and more money on hiring a moving company. I turned to my head of security. These individuals are trespassing. Please escort them off the premises immediately. If they attempt to enter this building again, I want them arrested for corporate harassment. Diane gasped loudly, dropping the massive floral arrangement. The expensive glass vase shattered against the concrete floor, sending water and white lilies scattering across the lobby. Harrison grabbed her arm, his face burning with a mixture of profound humiliation and absolute rage, as the security guards firmly grabbed their shoulders and guided them toward the revolving glass doors. I did not stay to watch them being thrown out onto the street. I turned around, walked calmly back into my private elevator, and pressed the button for the executive floor. The love-bombing campaign had officially failed, and their desperation was only going to grow. Their desperation reached its absolute boiling point exactly 5 days later. Gideon Cole walked into my office on Tuesday morning, dropping a thick cream-colored envelope onto my desk. It was a formal request for a mediation dinner at Laura, one of the most exclusive and expensive restaurants in the city. The invitation was drafted by Harrison's recently retained bankruptcy attorney. The enclosed letter explicitly promised that if I agreed to meet them on neutral ground, Harrison and Diane would formally surrender the physical keys to the suburban estate and sign a peaceful eviction agreement. It was a clear, desperate plea to avoid the public humiliation of the county sheriff dragging their furniture onto the front lawn. I told Gideon to accept the invitation. I wanted to look them in the eyes as they officially surrendered their empire. When I arrived at the private dining room of Laura that evening, the atmosphere was incredibly suffocating. The heavy mahogany doors closed behind me, sealing us in. There was no arrogant posturing tonight. There were no fake smiles or loud, boastful conversations about golf handicaps and investment banking. Harrison and Diane looked like completely broken people. The expensive Wagyu steaks and truffle risotto sat untouched on the pristine white tablecloth. They were practically vibrating with a terrifying raw anxiety. I took my seat across from them, keeping my posture impeccably straight. I did not reach for my napkin or the crystal water glass. I placed my phone face down on the table. I am here for the keys and the signed eviction surrender. I stated, my voice completely devoid of warmth. Gideon has already reviewed the terms. Hand them over and we can conclude this meeting. Diane immediately burst into tears. It was not her usual theatrical manipulative crying designed to garner sympathy from wealthy friends. This was the ugly, visceral sobbing of a woman staring directly into the abyss of total ruin. She reached across the table, her trembling hands grasping at the empty air before falling onto the white linen. "Jocelyn, please." Diane wept, her voice cracking under the weight of her panic. "The house is the least of our problems right now. You have to help us. You have to help your sister. They are going to put her in a federal prison." I raised a single eyebrow, my expression remaining completely locked. Prison. That is quite a leap from a simple failed vegan lipstick brand. Harrison dragged his hands down his pale, aging face. He looked entirely defeated, stripped of every ounce of the authoritarian arrogance he had wielded over me for my entire life. He let out a shaky, rattling breath. Savannah did not just default on the Vanguard line of credit, Harrison confessed, his voice barely a whisper. When the cosmetic company started hemorrhaging cash last year, she panicked. She started using the corporate accounts for personal expenses to maintain her lifestyle. She bought designer clothes, leased luxury vehicles, and booked vacations, writing it all off as business marketing expenses. And then she stopped paying the payroll taxes for her small warehouse staff. My analytical mind instantly processed the catastrophic nature of that specific financial crime. Unpaid payroll taxes were not just standard corporate debt. The Internal Revenue Service treated payroll tax evasion as outright theft from the federal government. It carried severe mandatory criminal penalties. The IRS initiated a full forensic audit 2 weeks ago. Harrison continued, his hands shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to steady them. They found everything, Jocelyn. The fraudulent write-offs, the commingled funds, the unpaid federal taxes. They are preparing to indict her for severe tax evasion and corporate fraud. The penalties and back taxes exceed $2 million. If she does not pay it immediately to settle the civil portion, the Department of Justice will file criminal charges. She will serve actual prison time. I sat back in my chair, absorbing the sheer monumental stupidity of my younger sister. While I had been working 80-hour weeks building a legitimate financial technology empire brick by brick, she had been systematically stealing from the federal government to fund her fake, glamorous social media lifestyle. "That is a fascinating cautionary tale about fiscal irresponsibility," I replied smoothly, my tone completely indifferent. "But I fail to see how Savannah's impending federal indictment has anything to do with my company foreclosing on your house." Diane let out a loud, desperate wail. "Because you are the only one who can save her," she cried out, leaning heavily across the table. "Preston found out about the IRS audit and completely abandoned her. He moved out yesterday. He is filing for a swift divorce to protect his own banking license. We have absolutely nothing left, Jocelyn. You took the house. Our credit is destroyed. You are sitting on a company worth $40 million. You have millions of dollars in personal capital. $2 million is nothing to you. It is pocket change." Harrison hastily reached into his leather briefcase on the floor. He did not pull out the house keys or the peaceful eviction agreement he had promised. Instead, he pulled out a thick, legally binding contract and pushed it frantically across the table toward me. "This is a corporate debt assumption agreement," Harrison explained, his eyes wide and begging. "Your company, Apex Risk Analytics, can officially acquire Savannah's failing company. You can absorb her corporate debt and pay off the IRS tax liens under your own corporate umbrella. You can write it off as a bad acquisition. It will barely make a dent in your quarterly profit margins. If you sign this, the IRS will drop the criminal investigation. Savannah will not go to jail." I looked down at the contract resting on the pristine tablecloth. They had lured me to this expensive restaurant under the guise of surrender, only to try and trap me into bailing out the golden child one last time. They wanted me to use the empire I built with my own blood and sweat to pay the federal government for Savannah's designer handbags and luxury vacations. Diane clasped her hands together in a prayer motion, tears streaming down her face. "Jocelyn, I know we have made mistakes. I know we were hard on you, but we are your family. Family comes first above everything else. She is your little sister. She is terrified. You cannot let her be locked in a cage. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. Please just save your sister this one time. Be the bigger person. I stared at the thick legal document. I reached out and let my fingertips graze the edge of the paper. Harrison and Diane collectively held their breath, their eyes wide with desperate, blinding hope. They truly believed that the heavy societal pressure of family obligation, combined with my massive wealth, would finally break my resolve. They thought I would look at my crying mother, look at the threat of a prison sentence, and crumble into the obedient self, sacrificing daughter they always expected me to be. I picked up the contract. I looked at the signature line waiting for my name. Then I looked directly into my mother's tear-filled, pleading eyes. I held the thick legal document in both hands, feeling the heavy, expensive weight of the paper. I looked deeply into my mother's tear-filled eyes. I saw the absolute certainty reflecting back at me. She genuinely believed that the heavy societal chains of family obligation would force my hand. She thought the sight of her crying would trigger a deeply ingrained childhood instinct to obey and protect them at all costs. My hands moved in one swift, violent motion. The sharp, ripping sound of the thick paper tearing cleanly in half echoed like a gunshot in the silent private dining room. Diane's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. She let out a choked gasp, stumbling backward in her chair. I placed the two torn halves together, gripped them tightly, and ripped them again. I let the 4 shredded pieces of the corporate debt assumption agreement flutter down onto the pristine white tablecloth, landing right next to their untouched Wagyu steaks. I am not a charity, and I am certainly not a shield for federal felonies, I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. You raised me to understand that investments require a guaranteed return. Paying off the federal government to keep a tax-evading fraudster out of prison offers absolutely zero return on investment. I declined the offer. Before Harrison could even process the destruction of his final lifeline, the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room burst open with incredible force. Savannah stormed into the room. She had clearly been waiting in the restaurant lobby the entire time, too cowardly to face me directly, but too desperate to wait at home for the results. Her designer makeup was ruined, her hair was a mess, and her face was contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She had heard enough through the heavy wood doors to know I had refused the bailout. "You cold-blooded, ungrateful monster!" Savannah shrieked at the top of her lungs, completely abandoning any remaining shred of country club decorum. She lunged toward the table, her hands balled into tight fists, shaking with violent fury. "You are a millionaire. You have more money than you could ever spend. You could make this entire IRS investigation disappear with a single phone call, and you are just going to let me go to a federal prison. You are my sister." I did not even blink. I looked at her with the same detached observation I used when reviewing a bad string of code. "You are not going to prison because I refuse to pay your debts, Savannah. You are going to prison because you stole millions of dollars from the federal government to buy luxury handbags and lease sports cars. The consequences of your staggering stupidity are entirely yours to bear." Harrison suddenly slammed his fists down onto the table, rattling the expensive crystal glasses. His despair had instantly evaporated, replaced by a desperate, cornered aggression. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You listen to me right now, Jocelyn." Harrison growled, his voice thick with malicious threats. "We brought you into this world. We fed you, we clothed you, and we put a roof over your head for 18 years. We invested a fortune in raising you. If you walk out that door and let your sister go to jail, I will drag you into civil court. I will file a lawsuit demanding full financial reimbursement for every single dollar we spent raising you. I will sue you for gross familial negligence." The absolute absurdity of his legal threat was staggering. I stared at him, marveling at how completely detached from reality he had become. "And I will not stop there?" Harrison continued, mistaking my silence for fear. "I have connections at major media outlets. I will go directly to the press. I will tell the entire world exactly what kind of ruthless, sociopathic corporate villain is running Apex Risk Analytics. I will tell the journalists how you deliberately bankrupted your own parents and left your sister to rot in jail. I will destroy your pristine corporate reputation, Jocelyn. Your clients will flee when they see how you treat your own flesh and blood. I looked at Harrison. I looked at Diane, who was weeping uncontrollably into her napkin. I looked at Savannah, who was glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. For a moment, the room was completely silent. And then I laughed. It was not a loud laugh, but it was a cold, sharp, and genuinely amused sound that cut straight through their aggressive posturing. My laughter sent a visible shiver down Savannah's spine. "You want to go to the media?" I asked, a dangerous, mocking smile forming on my lips. "You want to call the local news stations and tell them the story?" Please, Harrison, I implore you to do exactly that. Call the journalists. Tell them how you secretly leveraged your primary estate to fund a fake vegan cosmetics brand. Tell them how your youngest daughter committed massive federal tax evasion. The media will absolutely love the story of a fraudulent, pseudo-wealthy suburban family losing their mansion to their self-made CEO daughter. It will be front-page news, and it will only make my risk analysis firm look infinitely more effective. My investors will applaud the absolute lack of nepotism. Harrison's face went completely slack. The threat of a media smear campaign instantly imploded. He realized with crushing clarity that going public would only expose his own severe financial humiliation. As for your ridiculous threat to sue me for 18 years of child-rearing expenses, I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal, freezing pitch. I highly suggest you run that brilliant legal strategy past an actual attorney. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a thick, embossed cardstock business card belonging to my lead counsel, Gideon Cole. I tossed it onto the table, letting it land directly on top of the shredded bailout contract. "That is the direct line to my corporate litigation team," I stated firmly. "I welcome the discovery phase of any lawsuit you choose to file, Harrison. It will give my lawyers full legal authorization to subpoena decades of your personal financial records. I am sure the forensic accountants would find plenty of interesting discrepancies in how you managed your wealth over the years." Diane let out a loud, devastated wail, burying her face in her hands. Savannah backed away from the table, her breathing rapid and shallow, fully realizing that her final, desperate lifeline was permanently severed. There would be no secret bailout. There would be no miraculous rescue. I reached into my purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it onto the table next to the untouched water glass. "This covers my portion of the table service," I said, turning away from them. "You have exactly 7 days left to vacate my house, Harrison. And Savannah, I suggest you start researching federal prison dress codes. I hear orange is terribly unforgiving." I did not wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked straight toward the heavy mahogany doors. I pushed them open and stepped out into the bustling, elegant hallway of the restaurant. I left them trapped in that private dining room, surrounded by their shredded contracts, their empty threats, and the absolute, inescapable certainty of their impending destruction. I walked out the front doors of the establishment, stepped into my waiting car, and instructed my driver to take me back to headquarters. The final ties were officially severed, and I felt nothing but the pure, unadulterated oxygen of absolute freedom. The plush leather seat of my private car offered a quiet sanctuary after the suffocating atmosphere of the restaurant. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows, I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my lead corporate attorney. Gideon Cole answered on the very first ring. "The negotiation is officially over," I stated, my voice echoing in the quiet cabin of the car. "They refused to surrender the property keys. Harrison actually threatened to sue me for 18 years of child-rearing expenses and attempted to use a media smear campaign as leverage to force me into paying Savannah's federal tax debts." I could hear the low, dark chuckle rumbling in Gideon's throat through the speaker. "Child-rearing expenses." He repeated, his tone dripping with professional amusement. "That is an incredibly bold legal strategy for a man who is currently 90 days delinquent on a massive commercial bank loan. I assume you declined his generous offer." I tore their corporate debt assumption agreement into 4 pieces and left it on their dinner table, I replied smoothly. But I do not want to just wait for the standard foreclosure process to play out, Gideon. If Harrison wants to threaten me with a legal war, I am going to give him one. I want a preemptive strike. I want you to initiate a comprehensive forensic audit of my parents' entire financial history. Subpoena every bank statement, every tax return, and every asset transfer they have executed for the past 2 decades. We are going to tear their pristine suburban facade apart piece by piece. Consider it done, Gideon said, his voice sharpening into lethal professionalism. I will assemble the litigation team tonight. We will hit them with a mountain of discovery requests by tomorrow morning. They will not be able to hide a single cent. The next morning, the executive floor of Apex Risk Analytics transformed into a highly classified war room. I authorized my elite team of data scientists to work directly alongside Gideon's aggressive legal associates. We fed 20 years of Harrison's publicly available financial data, property records, and business filings into my proprietary artificial intelligence algorithm. We were looking for any hidden assets, any shell companies, or any fraudulent transfers that we could use to completely annihilate their impending defense in court. For 3 days, the servers hummed as the algorithm relentlessly scrubbed through decades of complex financial maneuvering. Harrison had always projected the image of a flawless, self-made wealthy man, but my software was designed to strip away the illusion and expose the raw, ugly truth underneath. On Thursday afternoon, my lead forensic accountant walked into my office. His face was unusually pale. He was holding a thick manila folder tightly against his chest. He bypassed my desk entirely and handed the folder directly to Gideon, who was sitting on the leather sofa, reviewing foreclosure statutes. Gideon opened the file, scanning the top document. His posture immediately stiffened. He read through the second page, and his jaw locked with a sudden visible tension. He stood up slowly and walked the folder over to my desk, laying it flat in front of me. "Jocelyn," Gideon said, his voice deadly serious, "we just found something catastrophic. It goes far beyond terrible financial management or vanity loans. This is a massive federal felony." I looked down at the documents. They were old yellowed bank records dating back exactly 15 years. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was from the estate management firm that had handled the passing of my late paternal grandfather. Harrison had always told me that my grandfather died completely bankrupt, leaving absolutely nothing behind but bad memories and unpaid medical bills. "Read the beneficiary line," Gideon instructed, pointing a firm finger at the bottom of the first page. I read the text. My breath caught sharply in my throat. My grandfather had not died bankrupt. He had left behind a highly secured private trust fund containing exactly $500,000. But the money was not left to Harrison. It was not left to Diane. And it was certainly not left to Savannah. The trust fund was designated exclusively and entirely for me. My eyes darted to the second document. It was a formal withdrawal authorization form dated the exact week of my 18th birthday. The form authorized the immediate liquidation of the entire $500,000 trust, transferring the funds directly into a joint checking account controlled by Harrison and Diane. At the bottom of the form, on the designated beneficiary signature line, was my name. I stared at the signature. It was a sloppy, hurried scrawl. It was a blatant, undeniable forgery. "They stole it," I whispered, the crushing weight of the revelation settling heavily onto my shoulders. The year I turned 18, the year they forced me to take on 2 minimum wage jobs to pay off the credit card debt, Harrison had fraudulently racked up in my name. They were sitting on a $500,000 trust fund that legally belonged to me. Gideon flipped to the final page in the folder, displaying a detailed money trail mapped out by the forensic accounting team. "They did not just steal it, Jocelyn. They laundered it. The data shows exactly where every single dollar went." Harrison used $80,000 to purchase his vintage luxury sports car. Diane funneled $50,000 into her exclusive country club memberships, and the remaining $370,000 was systematically drained to fund Savannah's elite private schooling, her designer wardrobes, and the initial seed money for her early failed vanity projects. A freezing, absolute silence descended over my office. The puzzle pieces of my miserable, agonizing 20s suddenly locked into place. They had not just neglected me, they had actively robbed me to fund their golden child. Every time I came home with bleeding, blistered feet from my waitressing shifts, every time I sat at the kitchen table crying over unpaid university tuition bills, they were watching me suffer while secretly spending my inheritance. This completely changes the legal battlefield, Gideon stated, his eyes burning with predatory legal ambition. This is not a civil dispute anymore. This is grand larceny, wire fraud, and severe identity theft. We do not just have the power to take their house, Jocelyn. We have the power to put Harrison and Diane in a federal penitentiary for a very long time. I reached out and traced the forged signature with my index finger. The anger I felt was no longer hot or chaotic. It was refined into a weapon of absolute precision. They wanted to threaten me with a lawsuit for 18 years of child-rearing expenses. They wanted to drag me into court and play the victims. Now I was going to gladly walk them right into a courtroom, lock the doors, and completely obliterate them. Draft the criminal complaint, Gideon. I commanded, my voice echoing with pure lethal authority. I want this trust fund fraud packaged with the Vanguard foreclosure documents. We are going to drop a nuclear bomb on their entire existence. Prepare the strike. Gideon nodded, snapping his heavy leather briefcase shut with a sharp, definitive click. The criminal complaint will be drafted and filed with the federal prosecutor's office by Friday morning, he assured me, his tone radiating absolute legal precision. We will package the trust fund forgery directly alongside the Vanguard foreclosure documents. They will not have a single second to breathe before the next strike hits. He swept out of my executive suite, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of my office. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering city skyline. They had robbed me blind. They had stolen my future, drained my inheritance, and smiled in my face while handing my money to the golden child. But their staggering, insatiable greed was about to become the exact instrument of their total annihilation. The very next afternoon, my private intercom buzzed. My head of building security sounded highly perplexed, lowering his voice as if speaking a secret. Ms. Jocelyn, I apologize for the interruption, but Preston is down in the loading dock lobby. He bypassed the main reception completely. He is alone, looking extremely anxious and requesting an urgent, highly classified meeting with you. He claims he has corporate assets you will find invaluable. Preston, the arrogant, condescending husband who had mocked my cheap uniform at the country club just 2 years prior. The ship was sinking far faster than I had anticipated, and the rats were already abandoning the lower decks. I instructed security to bring him up using the private freight elevator to ensure none of my employees or visiting clients saw him sweating in my pristine hallways. Preston stumbled into my executive suite looking like a heavily hunted animal. His bespoke tailored suit was severely wrinkled. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and a thick sheen of nervous sweat coated his forehead. He bypassed all pleasantries, practically throwing himself into the leather chair across from my desk. He reached into his jacket pocket with trembling fingers and dropped a sleek silver flash drive onto the cool glass surface of my desk. What exactly is this, Preston? I asked, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not lean forward. I did not touch the drive. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around my office as if he expected Harrison to jump out from behind a filing cabinet. That is Savannah's absolute destruction, he said, his voice vibrating with raw, cowardly desperation. It contains her complete, unredacted dual-ledger accounting books. The real ones. The ones she desperately hid from the federal auditors. It proves definitively that she knowingly committed federal tax fraud, gross embezzlement, and corporate wire fraud. It is the smoking gun the Internal Revenue Service needs to bypass a lengthy audit and secure an immediate federal indictment. I leaned back slowly in my leather chair, studying the pathetic excuse for a man sitting before me. And why exactly are you handing your beloved wife over to the federal government on a silver platter? Preston gripped the armrests of the chair, leaning forward with a sickening display of self-preservation. Because I am absolutely not going down with a sinking ship, Jocelyn. She lied to me. She ruined my credit score, she destroyed my professional reputation, and when the federal agents finish their audit, they will try to seize my personal banking assets as her spouse. I need a lifeline right now. I am offering you the exact irrefutable ammunition you need to lock her away in a federal prison forever. I kept my expression entirely neutral, projecting nothing but cold corporate authority. And what is your price for this ultimate betrayal? A director of acquisitions title at Apex Risk Analytics? Preston demanded, a desperate, greedy light flickering in his panicked eyes. A starting base salary of $500,000. And your corporate litigation team must shield me completely from her financial liabilities during the divorce proceedings. I looked at him with profound disgust. He was willing to sell out his own wife to save his skin and secure a high-paying executive job. It was a repulsive, spineless maneuver, but from a purely strategic standpoint, it was incredibly useful. You are an absolute coward, Preston, I stated coldly, watching him flinch at the blunt assessment. But you are a highly useful coward. I picked up the silver flash drive, rolling it between my fingers. I will have my data scientists review this drive. If the accounting ledgers are as damning as you claim, my lawyers will draft a conditional employment contract. But you need to keep Savannah completely in the dark until the legal trap officially snaps shut. If she catches wind of this deal before the federal agents arrive, the offer is permanently revoked. Preston nodded frantically, a pathetic wave of relief washing over his sweaty face. She suspects absolutely nothing. She is sitting in that mansion crying, completely convinced that I am at my law firm, trying to secure a defense attorney for her. But Preston was as arrogant as he was stupid. He did not realize that Savannah was a profoundly paranoid, deeply insecure narcissist. When individuals like Savannah are backed into a corner, they do not trust anyone, especially a husband who suddenly starts taking secret off-the-books meetings while their entire financial world collapses. The moment Preston scurried out of my building, I called my lead cybersecurity engineer into my office. I handed him the flash drive to securely extract and verify the tax fraud data, but I had a much more aggressive secondary order ready. I need you to create a digital honeypot immediately, I instructed my engineer, my voice sharp and focused. Build a highly classified, heavily encrypted external server. Fill it with fake but incredibly lucrative-looking corporate strategy documents belonging to Apex Risk Analytics. Make it look like proprietary trading algorithms and unreleased merger data. Then send a highly encrypted link to Preston's personal email address with a subject line indicating it is his new confidential executive employment contract. My engineer smiled, his fingers already flying across his tablet as he immediately understood the play: a digital snare. If anyone unauthorized accesses those specific files, the system will instantly log their external IP address and automatically alert federal cybercrime authorities. Exactly, I confirmed, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Preston is far too careless to keep his personal passwords hidden from his paranoid wife. Savannah knows her cosmetics company is dead. She knows her parents are losing their mansion to me. She is desperate for rapid cash liquidity. If she sees a highly confidential corporate document sitting in her husband's email inbox, she will not be able to resist stealing it to sell to my corporate competitors on the black market. The bait was officially set. Preston had just handed me the tax fraud evidence required to destroy Savannah's past, but I wanted her caught actively committing a fresh, undeniable federal crime in real time. I wanted her to seal her own devastating fate with her own greedy, thieving hands. The next 24 hours became a masterclass in psychological warfare. I sat in my quiet office, keeping a monitor dedicated entirely to the live security logs tracking the honeypot server. Savannah was a cornered, desperate rat, and cornered rats always make fatal, irreversible mistakes. The only question was exactly how long it would take for her to bite the poisoned cheese. It did not take long at all. Exactly 14 hours and 22 minutes later, a silent alarm triggered on my secondary monitor. A bright, pulsing red notification box overlaid the dark screen of my command terminal. An external unauthorized IP address had successfully bypassed the superficial security gateway of the honeypot server. I leaned forward, my hands resting flat on the cool glass of my mahogany desk, my eyes tracking the digital footprint in real time. The IP address mapped directly back to the residential router installed at my parents' suburban mansion. Savannah was awake. It was 3 in the morning. Preston was likely asleep, exhausted from his own cowardly maneuvering, leaving his unsecured laptop sitting on the kitchen island. Or perhaps she had simply lifted his phone while he showered. Savannah was incredibly vain, but she possessed a cunning rat-like survival instinct. She had noticed Preston's sudden shift in demeanor. She knew he was hiding something, and her paranoia had finally boiled over. The security log showed her navigating straight into Preston's email inbox. She skipped past the mundane banking alerts and zeroed in completely on the encrypted message sent from an Apex Risk Analytics domain. The subject line read, "Confidential Executive Onboarding and Strategic Asset Transfer." It was the perfect, irresistible bait. For a woman staring down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar tax lien and a looming divorce, that email was a glowing treasure chest. The log updated again. She was initiating a download. The heavy encrypted files containing fake proprietary trading algorithms and false merger acquisition data were transferring directly onto a personal, unsecured USB drive. I picked up my phone and dialed my lead cybersecurity engineer. He answered instantly, completely wide awake, monitoring the exact same dashboard from his own terminal. "She took it," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any inflection. "Every single file." My engineer confirmed the data transfer with a sharp, satisfied tone. "The tracking beacons embedded deep within the document metadata are fully active, Ms. Jocelyn. The moment she attempts to open those files on a secondary network or transmit them through an external email server, the Federal Cybercrime Division will receive an automated, unrecallable alert. She is holding a digital hand grenade." Savannah thought she had just secured her ultimate salvation. In her desperate, financially illiterate mind, she believed she could sell my supposed trade secrets to a rival financial technology firm. She thought she could extort millions of dollars on the corporate black market to pay off her massive federal tax debts and maintain her luxurious fake lifestyle. She had absolutely no idea that corporate espionage, specifically the theft of proprietary financial algorithms, carried a mandatory federal prison sentence. She was not just committing a petty crime. She was committing economic treason against a highly regulated financial entity. By 9 o'clock the following morning, the trap violently snapped shut. I was sitting in a strategy meeting with Gideon Cole when my personal phone vibrated with a priority high-level alert. The digital tracking beacon had officially pinged. Savannah had not wasted a single second. She had driven to a local upscale coffee shop, connected to their unsecured public Wi-Fi network, and attempted to email the stolen files to a well-known aggressive venture capital firm that directly competed with Apex Risk Analytics. She used an anonymous burner email address, completely oblivious to the fact that the embedded tracking code immediately bypassed the superficial anonymity and logged the exact physical location of her device. Gideon reviewed the incoming alert on his own encrypted tablet. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "The automated report has already been routed directly to the Cyber Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, closing the file folder in front of him. "The digital footprint is absolute, undeniable proof of commercial espionage and severe data theft. Combined with the tax fraud ledgers Preston handed over yesterday, Savannah has cemented her own destruction. She is looking at a minimum of 20 years in federal custody. There is absolutely no plea deal that can save her from this level of documented, premeditated federal crime." I stood up and walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling, sunlit city. The chessboard was perfectly set, and checkmate was completely unavoidable. Harrison and Diane were facing absolute financial ruin and the total humiliating loss of their suburban empire. Savannah was staring down the barrel of a massive federal indictment for tax evasion and corporate espionage. Preston was a traitor who had sold out his own wife, completely unaware that I had absolutely no intention of ever hiring him. They had completely destroyed themselves piece by piece, driven entirely by their own insatiable greed, toxic arrogance, and blind entitlement. "It is time to end this," I told Gideon, turning my back on the skyline and facing my attorney. "Send the formal legal summons to the mansion. Tell Harrison, Diane, and Savannah to report to the main estate library tomorrow evening at exactly 6 o'clock. Inform them that this is their final, absolute last chance to negotiate a peaceful surrender of the property before the county sheriff arrives to forcibly remove them. Gideon nodded, packing his heavy legal documents into his briefcase. He looked at me with a profound, terrifying respect. They will think they still have leverage, Jocelyn. They will walk into that room thinking Savannah's stolen data gives them the ultimate upper hand to blackmail you into forgiving their debts. I looked at him with eyes as cold as absolute zero. Let them think whatever they want for the next 24 hours, Gideon. When they try to play their stolen hand, I will drop the entire crushing weight of the federal government directly onto their heads. I want to be in the room to watch the exact moment the light of arrogance completely leaves their eyes. Prepare the final documents. Tomorrow we execute the collection. I pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the suburban estate at exactly 5:55 in the evening. My private driver navigated the long circular driveway, bringing the sleek black vehicle to a smooth halt right in front of the massive double oak doors. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, smoothing the lines of my tailored charcoal suit. Gideon Cole exited from the opposite side, his heavy leather briefcase gripped firmly in his hand. We did not speak. We did not need to. The execution plan was perfectly orchestrated. I did not knock. I used the spare key I had kept hidden in the depths of my purse for over 4 years. The heavy door swung open, revealing the grand echoing foyer I had once desperately fled. We walked directly toward the main estate library. The heavy mahogany doors of the library were already propped open. Harrison, Diane, and Savannah were waiting inside. I expected to see panic. I expected to see the frantic, desperate terror of people facing imminent homelessness and federal prison. Instead, I saw something entirely different. I saw a sickening, deeply delusional arrogance. Harrison was standing behind his massive oak desk, leaning forward on his knuckles, projecting a manufactured aura of absolute dominance. Diane sat on a plush leather sofa, her legs crossed, sipping a glass of expensive red wine with a relaxed, almost victorious smirk playing on her lips. Savannah stood beside her father, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, clutching a thick manila folder against her body. The sheer audacity of their posture was almost comical. They genuinely believed they had outmaneuvered me. "You are right on time," Jocelyn Harrison announced, his booming voice echoing off the library walls. He sounded like a man who had just won a high-stakes poker game. I must admit, sending a courier with an eviction notice was a bold move, but it was also incredibly foolish. I stopped in the center of the room, keeping a generous physical distance between us. Gideon stood slightly behind my right shoulder, an imposing, silent sentinel. "I am not here for idle conversation, Harrison," I stated, my voice cutting through the thick atmosphere like a surgical blade. "The terms of this meeting were explicitly outlined in the summons. You are here to surrender the physical keys to this property and sign the peaceful eviction agreement." Diane let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She set her wine glass down on a side table and stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress. "You really think you can just march in here and take our home?" Diane sneered, her eyes flashing with malicious triumph. "You always were so naive, Jocelyn. You think you are the only one who knows how to play the corporate game. We know exactly how you built your precious company. We know your entire billionaire facade is built on a massive illegal fraud." I kept my expression entirely neutral, projecting nothing but cold clinical observation. "I see. And what exactly do you think you know?" Savannah stepped forward dramatically, slamming the manila folder down onto the polished oak desk. Her eyes were wild with manic, desperate energy. "We have the files, Jocelyn. I got them directly from your internal servers. I saw the proprietary algorithms and the acquisition targets. But I also saw the truth. You did not invent some brilliant artificial intelligence risk model. You built your software using illegally stolen banking data from private consumers. You hacked into institutional lenders, stole their internal metrics, and repackaged it as your own technology. I stared at Savannah, processing the sheer staggering magnitude of her delusion. In her desperate attempt to monetize the honeypot files she had stolen, she had completely misinterpreted the fake data my cybersecurity engineer had planted. She had convinced Harrison and Diane that my company was engaged in massive consumer data theft. Harrison slammed his hand down on the desk, pointing a threatening finger directly at my face. Corporate espionage, Jocelyn. Massive data breaches. If the federal regulatory boards or the financial press get their hands on this information, Apex Risk Analytics will be investigated and immediately shut down. Your investors will pull their capital overnight. You will be blacklisted from the financial sector and likely face severe criminal charges. You are currently trespassing on a highly sensitive corporate secret, Gideon Cole interjected, his voice radiating a lethal legal calm. Attempting to weaponize stolen data is a federal crime. We are not weaponizing anything. Harrison fired back, his face flushing with arrogant superiority. We are offering a mutually beneficial family settlement. You want to keep your fake tech empire intact. Here are our terms. You will immediately execute a total cancellation of the Vanguard foreclosure. You will sign over the deed of this house back to us completely free and clear. Furthermore, your company will fully absorb Savannah's corporate tax debt and issue a lump sum payment to the Internal Revenue Service to clear her name. Diane crossed her arms, looking at me with absolute disdain. It is a very simple trade, Jocelyn. You erase our debts and we keep your dirty little corporate secrets hidden from the media. You have the money. Pay the IRS, give us our house back, and we can all move on. If you refuse, Savannah will leak this entire folder to the Wall Street Journal and every major financial regulator in the country by tomorrow morning. We will ruin you. I stood perfectly still in the center of the library, absorbing the sheer blinding audacity of their ultimatum. They were standing in a house they no longer owned, drowning in toxic debt, actively confessing to the possession of stolen corporate data, and attempting to brutally blackmail a multi-million-dollar financial institution. They thought they had cornered me. They thought they had finally found the ultimate leverage to force me back into the role of the obedient self-sacrificing scapegoat. I looked at Harrison, whose chest was puffed out with false victory. I looked at Diane, who was smiling as if she had just won a championship trophy. I looked at Savannah, who was clutching the desk, convinced she had just saved herself from federal prison. I let the silence stretch out, allowing their arrogant certainty to fill every corner of the room. I wanted them to savor this exact moment of perceived triumph. I wanted them to hold on to the feeling of absolute power for just a few seconds longer. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing razor-sharp pitch that instantly lowered the temperature in the room. Harrison frowned, clearly unsettled by my complete lack of panic. I suggest you take this seriously, Jocelyn. We are not bluffing. We will destroy your company. I turned my head slightly toward my attorney. Gideon, I said softly. Gideon unclasped the heavy brass locks of his leather briefcase. The sharp click echoed loudly in the tense library. You have completely misunderstood the dynamic of this meeting, Harrison, I stated, stepping forward and placing both hands firmly on the edge of the oak desk. I did not come here to negotiate a settlement. I came here to execute a total asset seizure. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The absolute lethal authority in my tone made Savannah take a sudden, terrified step backward. The smug, victorious smiles on Harrison and Diane's faces began to falter, slowly replaced by the creeping, cold realization that they had just walked blindly into a devastating trap. You think you stole leverage, Savannah? I asked, a dark, mocking smile finally breaking across my face. You did not steal leverage. You swallowed poison, and the clock has just run out. I held my right hand out to Gideon without looking away from my family. My attorney reached into the depths of his heavy leather briefcase and extracted a thick blue folder bearing an unmistakable official government seal. He placed the heavy document firmly into my waiting palm. I lifted the folder and threw it directly onto the center of the polished oak desk. It landed with a loud, definitive smack, resting right on top of Savannah's pathetic manila folder of stolen data. That is not a negotiation settlement, I stated, my voice echoing off the high ceilings of the Grand Library. That is an active, heavily documented criminal investigation file currently under review by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It details a massive, highly coordinated instance of identity theft and grand larceny. Harrison scoffed, though a sudden nervous tremor betrayed his arrogant posture. What kind of ridiculous intimidation tactic is this? We have never committed grand larceny. You are grasping at straws, Jocelyn. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing him to meet my freezing gaze. 15 years ago, my grandfather passed away. He left behind a private trust fund containing exactly $500,000. He designated me as the sole exclusive beneficiary, but I never saw a single penny of that money, did I, Harrison? Because the week I turned 18, you and Diane deliberately forged my signature on the withdrawal authorization forms. You liquidated the entire trust and funneled the cash directly into your joint checking accounts. The arrogant smirk instantly vanished from Harrison's face. His jaw went completely slack and the remaining color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. Diane let out a sharp, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as she stumbled backward against the leather sofa. They thought that secret was buried permanently. They thought I would never find the paper trail they had hidden so carefully. "We are your parents," Harrison stammered, his voice suddenly weak and defensive. "We had every right to manage those funds. We used that money to raise the family, to keep a roof over your head." I slammed my hands down on the desk, leaning in close. "You did not use it to raise me," I fired back, my voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom. "My forensic accounting team traced every single stolen dollar. You used $80,000 of my inheritance to buy your luxury vintage sports car. You used $50,000 to pay for Diane's exclusive country club memberships. And you drained the remaining $370,000 to fund Savannah's private schooling, her designer wardrobes, and her initial vanity business projects. You financed your golden child's entire existence with my money, while you forced me to work 2 minimum wage jobs to pay off the credit card debt you fraudulently opened in my name." Gideon stepped up beside me, his presence radiating lethal legal authority. Under state and federal law, forging a beneficiary's signature to misappropriate a $500,000 trust is a severe felony, Gideon explained, delivering the legal reality like a judge passing a sentence. The statute of limitations on fraud of this magnitude is paused when the victim is unaware of the crime. The federal prosecutor's office has already received our comprehensive forensic accounting report. They have the forged documents. They have the bank transfer receipts. You are both facing mandatory multi-year prison sentences for wire fraud and severe identity theft. Diane began to sob hysterically, burying her face in her hands. The pristine, wealthy suburban matriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. Harrison sank heavily into his expensive leather office chair. His chest heaved as he struggled to process the absolute destruction of his carefully constructed life. The threat of prison was real, documented, and completely unavoidable. But I was not finished. The execution required a second fatal blow. I held my hand out to Gideon again. He placed a stark, bright red folder into my grip. I tossed it onto the desk right next to the FBI file. The red cover stood out violently against the dark wood of the desk. "That is the second item on tonight's agenda," I announced coldly. "What is that?" Savannah whispered, her voice shaking violently as she stared at the red folder. She instinctively backed away from the desk as if the documents were physically burning. "That is the official notice of foreclosure for this property," I stated. "You missed your operational payments to Vanguard National Bank for 6 consecutive months. Your 90-day grace period officially expired at midnight last night. As the supreme creditor holding your toxic debt portfolio, Apex Risk Analytics executed a swift, non-judicial foreclosure procedure this morning." Harrison shook his head frantically, pointing a trembling finger at Savannah's stolen data file. "No, you cannot do this. We have leverage. We have your proprietary data. We will destroy your company if you try to take this house." I looked at him with profound, unwavering pity. "You have absolutely nothing, Harrison. You are standing in a house you do not own, trying to bargain with stolen goods that possess zero value. We did not come here to negotiate a buyout. We came here to inform you that the deed to this estate has been legally and permanently transferred. I gestured around the grand library, sweeping my hand past the towering mahogany bookshelves, the expensive art pieces on the walls, and the antique Persian rug under our feet. You are currently trespassing in a building that belongs entirely to my company. The reality of their absolute ruin crashed down upon them like a collapsing building. Harrison put his head in his hands, letting out a low, agonizing groan of pure defeat. He had leveraged his entire kingdom on a failing cosmetics brand, and he had lost everything. The suburban mansion he had used to project false wealth and superiority to his country club friends was gone. The safe haven he had stolen my money to maintain was officially ripped from his grasp. Diane slid off the leather sofa, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the floor. She wept loudly, her cries echoing painfully off the high ceilings of the library. "My beautiful house," she wailed, clutching at the expensive fabric of her dress. "Where are we going to go? Our friends live here. Our whole life is here. You cannot throw us out into the street, Jocelyn. We will be homeless." I stared down at my weeping mother, feeling absolutely no remorse. "You should have thought about the consequences of homelessness when you forced your 18-year-old daughter out into the freezing November night with only $300 in her bank account," I replied, my voice a flawless mask of icy detachment. "I survived because I had to. Now it is your turn to see how the real world operates when you cannot steal from your own children to survive." Savannah gripped the edge of the desk, her face contorted in a mixture of pure terror and blinding desperate rage. She was watching her parents crumble, watching the protective walls of her luxurious upbringing shatter into a million irreparable pieces. But she still clung desperately to her stolen manila folder, fully believing it was her ultimate shield. "You are a monster, Jocelyn!" Savannah screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You think you have won because you took the house. You think a foreclosure scares me. I will send these files to the press right now. I will email every single regulatory agency in the country. I will burn your tech company to the ground, and we will watch you lose everything too." I looked at my younger sister, savoring the final, pathetic remnants of her delusional arrogance. The trap was ready to snap shut permanently. I took a slow, measured step toward her, preparing to deliver the third and final blow that would lock her in a federal cage. I stopped exactly 1 foot away from Savannah. She was clutching her stolen manila folder against her chest, like a physical shield, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She truly believed those printed pages were her golden ticket out of the financial grave she had dug for herself. I held out my hand. Gideon placed the third and final folder into my palm. It was thick, bound in stark black leather, and carried the unmistakable gravity of a federal indictment. I did not toss this one on the desk. I pressed it directly against the manila folder Savannah was holding, forcing her to take it. "Open it!" I commanded, my voice dropping to a freezing whisper. Savannah fumbled with the black cover, her manicured fingers shaking so violently she nearly dropped both files. Inside were high-resolution screenshots of her sitting in the upscale coffee shop at dawn. There were detailed network logs, IP address traces, and a printed copy of the exact email she had sent to my corporate competitor. "You really thought you could hack into a multi-million-dollar financial technology firm with a stolen password and walk away rich," I said, watching the blood completely drain from her face. "You thought you were stealing my proprietary risk assessment algorithms, but my cybersecurity team saw you log in the moment you opened that laptop. We watched you download the files. Those documents were a digital honeypot, Savannah. They were entirely fake, embedded with advanced tracking beacons that activated the second you connected to a public wireless network." Savannah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the network logs, her eyes wide with a dawning, paralyzing horror. "When you clicked send on that email this morning," I continued, my tone totally devoid of mercy, "you did not just attempt to extort my company. You transmitted classified, poisoned data across state lines. The tracking beacon automatically forwarded a complete forensic packet directly to the cyber division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You committed corporate espionage, a severe federal felony that carries a mandatory minimum sentence." Harrison let out a choked, desperate noise from his chair. Corporate espionage, he stammered, looking wildly between me and his youngest daughter. Savannah, what did you do? She was trying to pay off the Internal Revenue Service. Gideon interjected, his lethal legal voice cutting through the panic. Because the FBI is not the only federal agency coming for her. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has just received her complete, unredacted dual-ledger accounting books. They have absolute proof of her massive tax evasion, the fraudulent write-offs, and the unpaid payroll taxes. Savannah dropped the folders. They scattered across the floor, ignored. That is a lie, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. Nobody has those accounting books. They are locked on a secure drive. Only Preston has access to that secure drive. Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors of the library swung open for the third time tonight. Preston walked into the room. He was not wearing his arrogant country club smile. He wore a rumpled suit and his face was tight with cold, calculating self-preservation. He carried a single crisp white envelope in his hand. Preston Savannah sobbed, rushing toward him with her arms outstretched. Tell them they are lying. Tell them you did not give them my books. Please, Preston, they are trying to send me to federal prison. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. He raised his hand, physically blocking Savannah from touching him. He looked at her with an expression of absolute, unfiltered disgust. I gave them everything, Savannah Preston stated, his voice ringing with brutal clarity across the silent library. I gave Jocelyn your real accounting ledgers yesterday afternoon. I handed over every single fraudulent receipt, every hidden bank statement, and every fake tax return you filed. Diane wailed from the floor, clutching her chest as if she had been physically shot. Preston, how could you do this to your own wife? She is your family. She is a massive toxic liability, Preston fired back, his eyes darting nervously toward Gideon and me before snapping back to Savannah. You lied to me for 2 years. You told me the business was thriving. You buried my future in $2 million of federal tax debt. The moment the IRS finishes their audit, they are going to freeze all marital assets. They are going to seize my banking accounts, destroy my credit score, and ruin my investment banking license. I am not going down with a sinking ship because you wanted to play pretend CEO with stolen money. Preston walked past his weeping wife and tossed the white envelope directly onto the polished oak desk right next to the FBI file and the foreclosure notice. Those are expedited divorce papers, Preston announced, straightening his jacket. I filed them with the county clerk this morning. I am formally severing all legal and financial ties to you, Savannah. My attorneys have already drafted a cooperation agreement with the federal prosecutors. In exchange for handing over your tax fraud ledgers, I have been granted total legal immunity. You are completely on your own. Savannah collapsed onto her knees. She grabbed the edge of the heavy desk, her fingernails scraping against the polished wood as she let out a visceral, agonizing scream. It was the sound of a spoiled, entitled narcissist watching her entire fraudulent reality burn to absolute ash. Her husband had sold her out. Her business was dead. Her parents were homeless. And the federal government was actively preparing an indictment that would lock her in a cage for decades. Harrison staggered to his feet, his hands trembling violently as he gripped the back of his leather chair. Jocelyn, I am begging you, he pleaded, his voice stripped of all dignity. We will give you the house. We will sign the eviction papers right now. Just call your lawyers off. Call the FBI. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will file for bankruptcy tomorrow. I will liquidate my retirement accounts to pay the IRS. Just do not let them take my daughter away. I looked at the broken man standing before me, the man who had forged my signature to steal my $500,000 inheritance. You cannot file for bankruptcy to erase this, Harrison, I replied, my voice dropping to a terrifying absolute calm. Gideon stepped forward, delivering the final fatal legal strike. Under federal law, Chapter 7, bankruptcy cannot discharge debts incurred through fraud, embezzlement, or intentional theft. Furthermore, tax liens issued by the IRS for unpaid payroll taxes are strictly non-dischargeable. Your stolen trust fund debt and Savannah's federal tax penalties will follow you until the day you die. The government will garnish your wages, seize your pensions, and drain your Social Security checks. There is no escape hatch. There is no reset button. Diane crawled across the expensive Persian rug, She reached out her trembling fingers wrapping around the hem of my tailored trousers. Jocelyn, she wept, her tears soaking into the fabric. Please, you have your vengeance. You took everything. Show us some mercy. We are your blood. I looked down at the woman who had watched me suffer for years, while she spent my stolen money on luxury country club memberships. I did not kick her away. I simply took a slow, deliberate step backward, forcing her hands to drop empty onto the floor. I am showing you exactly the same mercy you showed me when you forced me out into the freezing cold with $300 to my name, I stated, my words falling like heavy iron gavels in the silent room. You wanted me to be a failure. You designed my destruction so you could fund your golden child. I simply rebuilt the empire you tried to burn, and now I am collecting what is owed. I turned to Gideon. We are done here. I looked back at the 4 broken people trapped in the library. You have exactly 7 days to vacate my property. If a single fixture is damaged, or if you attempt to remove anything other than your personal clothing, I will add destruction of corporate property to your growing list of felony charges. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy mahogany doors. The sound of Savannah's hysterical sobbing and Diane's desperate pleading echoed behind me, bouncing off the high walls of the estate they no longer owned. I did not look back. I stepped out into the cool evening air, the heavy doors closing firmly behind me, shutting them inside the tomb of their own making. The debt was officially collected, and I stepped into the bright, unburdened light of my absolute freedom. I settled into the plush leather seat of my waiting car, the heavy door clicking shut instantly, muffling the sounds of my family weeping inside the mansion. Gideon slid in beside me, his briefcase resting securely on his lap. As the driver pulled away from the sprawling suburban estate, I looked out the tinted window. I did not look back at the grand facade or the perfectly manicured lawn. I only looked forward, watching the city lights blur into a brilliant glowing path of endless potential. The following 7 days were a masterclass in swift, merciless legal execution. Despite Gideon's explicit warning in the library, Harrison remained entirely blinded by his own arrogance. He spent the first 48 hours desperately trying to secure a high-profile bankruptcy attorney. He genuinely believed he could leverage his old country club connections to bypass federal law. He thought he could simply file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, wipe his financial slate clean, and walk away from the stolen trust fund money without a single scratch. Gideon kept me updated on every single one of Harrison's frantic maneuvers. Every prestigious law firm in the city took one look at the heavily documented FBI file regarding the forged trust fund signatures and immediately refused to represent him. They informed Harrison of the exact same freezing reality Gideon had delivered. Debts incurred through intentional fraud, grand larceny, and severe identity theft are permanently non-dischargeable. There was no legal loophole. There was no clever accounting trick. Harrison and Diane were legally bound to repay the stolen $500,000 plus 15 years of compounded interest for the rest of their natural lives. The federal government would systematically garnish their pensions, seize their Social Security checks, and drain whatever meager wages they could earn until the debt was fully satisfied. Savannah's reality shattered even faster. She did not even make it to the end of the 7-day eviction period. On Wednesday morning, federal agents from the Cybercrime Division executed a search warrant at the mansion. Because Preston had already surrendered her physical accounting ledgers to the Internal Revenue Service, in exchange for his own immunity, the agents had absolute probable cause to seize all of Savannah's electronic devices. They escorted my screaming, hysterical sister out of the house in handcuffs. Her designer clothes were swapped for a standard-issue federal uniform before the sun even set. Preston finalized his expedited divorce proceedings completely uncontested, leaving Savannah to face the crushing weight of a multi-million-dollar tax evasion indictment entirely on her own. When the morning of the 7th day finally arrived, I did not go to the estate in person. I had absolutely no desire to witness their pathetic, lingering departure. I sat comfortably in my executive office sipping hot coffee while my head of security monitored the live feed from the newly installed perimeter cameras. Right at 9 in the morning, the county sheriff arrived at the property line, flanked by my private security contractors. Harrison and Diane were forced out of the grand front doors. They were allowed to take only their personal clothing and basic necessities. The luxury vehicles they had purchased with my stolen inheritance had already been seized by federal authorities. They stood on the sidewalk with a pile of cheap cardboard boxes, waiting for a budget moving van to transport their belongings to a cramped, low-income apartment on the outskirts of the city. The woman who had once mocked my cheap waitressing uniform was now wearing faded sweatpants, her face hollow and aged by pure stress. The man who had called me a miserable financial liability was now a convicted fraudster, completely stripped of his wealth, his status, and his fake suburban kingdom. They had gambled their entire existence on a golden child who was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, and they had lost absolutely everything. Once the property was entirely vacated and secured, I ordered an immediate commercial appraisal. I did not want the house. I did not want to live in the walls where I had been systematically abused, ignored, and belittled. Within 2 weeks, I sold the entire estate to a commercial real estate developer at a massive premium. The developer brought in heavy machinery and bulldozed the pristine mansion to the ground, clearing the land to build a modern high-density luxury condominium complex. The physical monument to my parents' arrogance was completely erased from the map, turned to dust and rubble, leaving absolutely no trace that their toxic empire had ever existed. 6 months passed, and my life expanded in ways I had only ever dreamed of during those dark, freezing nights in my tiny studio apartment. Apex Risk Analytics went public, executing a flawless initial public offering that cemented my status as one of the most successful financial technology founders in the industry. I walked onto the trading floor of the stock exchange surrounded by my brilliant, fiercely loyal team and rang the opening bell. I had built a fortress of wealth security and undeniable power, utilizing the exact intellect and ambition my family had constantly tried to crush. I never spoke to Harrison, Diane, or Savannah again. I felt absolutely no guilt regarding their current circumstances. They were working minimum wage retail jobs in their late 60s, their paychecks heavily garnished by the federal government to repay the inheritance they had stolen from me. Savannah was serving a mandatory federal sentence, her fake social media lifestyle permanently replaced by the harsh reality of a prison cell. Some people believe that family requires unconditional forgiveness, that blood ties demand endless sacrifice, regardless of the abuse inflicted. I entirely reject that notion. Loyalty is earned through respect, support, and genuine care. My family chose to view me as an expendable asset, a scapegoat they could exploit and discard at their convenience. They thought I would quietly accept my role as the perpetual failure. They thought I would remain in the shadows forever. They were wrong. I took the pain, the betrayal, and the overwhelming rejection, and I forged it into an unbreakable weapon. I did not just survive their cruelty. I used it as the foundational blueprint to build an empire they could never touch. As I stand looking out over the city from the balcony of my penthouse, I feel nothing but profound, absolute peace. The debts have all been collected, the toxic ties are permanently severed, and the rest of my life belongs entirely unapologetically to me.